Chapter 2748. Gasps could be heard from the crowd. Everyone thought that there would be a charming little princess in the carriage, but they didn't expect an ordinary-looking young man to come out. If this young man stood in the crowd, he would be considered ordinary at most, but standing beside Rongyue Tianlan, he became a green leaf in contrast to this peerlessly handsome man. He could almost be described as ugly. No one expected such a situation, and many people's gazes turned to Rongyue Tianlan. They were all guessing whether this 8th Prince Rongyue was gay or not. Suddenly, someone in the crowd shouted, "Boss Shen!" Ji Xinyue's eyes turned and saw the 3 Qi brothers in the crowd. She didn't expect the 3 brothers to be able to make it to this event. "Brother Shen, so you're sitting in the 8th Prince's carriage." This time, the one who spoke was the Prince of Xishuang City. He looked at Ji Xinyue with a complicated gaze, probably thinking of him as Rongyue Tianlan's boy toy. This 8th Prince exposed him in front of everyone with great fanfare. Was he trying to show that he was gay? Then was the matter between him and little Princess Ji Tianyue just a rumor? But just now, everyone saw little Princess Ji Tianyue sitting in the same carriage as him. Brother Rongyue. The crowd at the entrance of the valley was in a commotion, and then they parted like a tide, making a narrow path for one person to pass through, and little Princess Ji Tianyue ran in. She blinked her big eyes and said coquettishly, "Brother Rongyue, so you're here. You said you had something to do. I've been looking for you for almost an hour." Her words were very artistic. She didn't say that she was in the same carriage as him. However, it also made people speculate that this 8th Prince Rongyue had just gotten off from Ji Tianyu's carriage, which was only an hour or so ago. This indirectly proved that the rumor was true and not a rumor. Ji Tianyue's gaze fell on Ji Xinyue's face, her eyes full of curiosity. "Brother Rongyue, you said you were going to get a big brother to be your helper. You were talking about him, right?" "Hello, big brother. I'm Ji Tianyue." Ji Tianyue gave Ji Xinyue a friendly smile. Ji Xinyue looked down at her, suddenly wanting to laugh. She really underestimated her little sister. She had always thought that this little sister of hers was as innocent and pure as a crystal, making her want to protect her. But it turned out that her heart was so deep, as expected of a child who grew up in the palace. Once her interests were involved, she could also be so calculative. She was an expert in palace politics. She crossed her arms and looked at Rongyue Tianlan, wanting to see what he would do and say. He had sacrificed a lot for Ji Tianyue and doted on her a lot. Even if he knew that the child was lying, he wouldn't expose her, would he? His little sister should also have the same idea, right? That was why she dared to say that in front of others. Once Rongyue Tianlan admitted it at this moment, it would be equivalent to indirectly admitting that there was an ambiguous relationship between him and little Tianyu. His marriage with this little princess would almost be set in stone. He couldn't possibly break off his elder sister's engagement, flirt with his younger sister, and then turn around and deny it, right? Her little sister was really good at this. It was too high. However, it should be in line with Rongyue Tianlan's thoughts, right? After all, he seemed to be interested in her, so he might just go with the flow. Then again, Rongyue Tianlan looked gentle and good-tempered, but she was extremely arrogant in her bones. Chapter 2749. Rongyue Tianlan looked gentle and had a good temper, but he was extremely arrogant. With his intelligence, he should be able to see through little Tianyu's thoughts. Was he willing to be schemed against by a little girl? What would he do? She crossed her arms and waited to see Rongyue Tianlan make a fool of himself. Rongyue Tianlan only nodded at Ji Tianyu. The smile on his handsome face was still very amiable. "Tianyu, why are you here as a child? Your father is at ease to let you go out alone. Who came with you? Don't get separated from your companions. Do you understand?" His words sounded very concerned, but it undoubtedly refuted Ji Tianyu's lies. Ji Tianyu's expression changed slightly. She was still a child after all. Meeting someone like Rongyue Tianlan who did not play by the rules, she was a little confused. Ji Xinyu was also a little surprised. What was Rongyue Tianlan planning? Was it a punishment for Ji Tianyu making up lies about him? Or was it an explanation for her? While she was thinking, Rongyue Tianlan's gaze fell on her. With a faint smile, he said leisurely, "Xinyu, are you planning to go into the mountain dressed like this?" His voice was neither loud nor soft, just like an ordinary person's, but it was very penetrating, and everyone in the valley heard it. Everyone. Those who were struck by lightning probably had the same expression. The second rumor said that the peerless beauty looked like this. Wasn't she too manly? The three Chi brothers opened their mouths wide, their faces full of shock and disbelief. The jade thumb ring in Shi Shuangqing's hand fell to the ground. Ji Tianyu's face was even paler, looking at Ji Xinyu. "What he is she?" Rongyue Tianlan continued. "Xinyu, do you want these people to misunderstand you? Why not show your true self? You can't use this appearance to break off the engagement with me, right?" Ji Xinyu smiled gently. "I'm just doing this for convenience. Now that I'm breaking off the engagement with you as the third princess of the Nantian clan, I naturally have to return to my original appearance." She casually turned around in the carriage, and after a faint seven-colored light flashed, the ordinary young man disappeared and was replaced by a beautiful young lady. She was dressed in a neat light green dress, and her black hair was casually tied into a bun. Her eyebrows were like distant mountains, her eyes were like cold stars, and her lips were as red as cherry blossoms. At this moment, her lips were slightly pursed, and the corners of her lips were slightly curved upwards, revealing her mesmerizing dimples. Beautiful. It was the kind of clear and bright beauty. Standing together with Rongyu Tianlan, he was actually not overshadowed by his brilliance at all. When the two of them stood together, it was as if pearls and jade were reflecting each other's brilliance. One couldn't help but think of a phrase, a perfect pair. Gasps could be heard from the crowd. Some people's mouths, which were originally half open, were now in an O shape. On the other hand, the three Chi brothers were so excited that their faces turned red. They were so excited that their hands were trembling. Heavens, they actually traveled together with this legendary princess for several days. Oh my God. As for Shi Shuangqing, the jade thumb ring on the ground had already been picked up by his subordinates and carefully wiped clean. He unconsciously played with it, but his eyes flashed with a fiery passion as he looked at Ji Xinyu. Of course, when Ji Xinyu revealed her original appearance, the crowd was also in an uproar. There were all kinds of guesses, but after a while, one became the mainstream, and that was that some people suspected that she was not Princess Ji Xinyu, but was invited by someone to impersonate her. As for the purpose, it was unclear. Chapter 2750. It was probably to help the real Princess Ji Xinyu make a comeback, so that it would be easier for her to get married in the future. The most difficult thing in this world was to keep the mouth shut, and it was also difficult to interfere with other people's wild guesses. Someone who was more direct simply asked, "Is she really Princess Ji Xinyu?" "Yeah, it doesn't seem possible." The crowd was buzzing, some were agreeing, and some were refuting. Ji Xinyu was not interested in this game, where you had to prove that you were the real person. She had appeared in her real body, and using her real body to break off the engagement with Rongyue Tianlan was enough to show her sincerity. The other people's discussions. For someone like her who was in the vortex of gossip, these discussions were just fleeting clouds. Her figure rose, and she wanted to directly fly towards the entrance, to complete the main task first. But just as she moved, her hand was grabbed by Rongyue Tianlan. So not only did she not fly up, she was brought a step closer to him and almost heroically knocked him off the carriage. "Hey, you!" Ji Xinyu hurriedly steadied herself, narrowed her eyes, and looked at Rongyue Tianlan dangerously. The two of them were about to break off the engagement. What was the meaning of his sudden intimate action? She was about to take back her hand, but Rongyue Tianlan directly asked Ji Tianyu, who had been standing below in a daze. "Tianyu, who is she?" He had always been very kind to Ji Tianyu, and at this time, he did not say anything harsh. There was even a smile on his lips, but his eyes were faintly sharp. Ji Xinyu's heart skipped a beat. Rongyue Tianlan suddenly asked Ji Tianyu this. Was he also giving her a chance? A chance to turn over a new leaf? Perhaps Ji Tianyu's actions had really stepped on Rongyue Tianlan's bottom line. Ji Xinyu also slightly held her breath, wanting to hear how this sister she had always doted on would answer. and the other people's gazes were also focused on Ji Tianyu. If the girl in front of them was really Ji Shinyu, there was no reason why Ji Tianyu could not recognize her. So her words could be the final nail in the coffin, dispelling everyone's doubts. Ji Tianyu's little face had been pale, and at this moment, her small mouth was slightly open. She paused, her eyelashes trembling, her small mouth opened and closed a few times and finally said, "She is my sister Shinyu." A single word determined the fate of the universe. Ji Shinyu secretly let out a sigh of relief. She wasn't relieved because she had finally proven that she was Ji Shinyu, but because she felt that there was still some hope for her little sister. At the very least, she didn't choose to kick her when she was down. She didn't dote on her for nothing. Rongyue Shinlin glanced at Ji Tianyue. A hint of disappointment flashed through her eyes. Everyone knew that Rongyue Tianlan stood aloof from worldly affairs and liked to live a free and easy life, but not many people really understood him. No matter how carefree he was, he had grown up in the palace after all. What kind of conspiracy had he not seen in this world? If Ji Tianyue wanted to play the palace intrigue in front of him, it was no different from showing off in front of Guan Yu. Ji Tianyue thought that she had no flaws, but in the eyes of Rongyue Tianlan, there were flaws everywhere. Ji Tianyue purposely paused when she answered just now, and her eyes even rolled twice. Although she had proven that Ji Shinyu was her sister, if those actions fell into the eyes of people with ulterior motives, they would think that she was forced to admit it. This little girl played a good trick, and she didn't offend him, Rongyue Tianlan, making him feel that she was still an innocent child. She could also make those old foxes suspicious, and even more suspicious of Ji Shinyu's identity. Chapter 2751. He glanced around, and indeed, he saw suspicion on the faces of some old foxes. Rongyue Tianlan had always thought that he liked smart women, especially those who could see through things with just a hint, which would save him a lot of trouble. He felt that this kind of woman was very cute even if she had some tricks up her sleeve, so he admired Ning Xuema, who liked to pretend to be a pig to eat the tiger. The female friends he made were all smart women, and some of them could even be called sly. He could see through the tricks Ji Tianyue had played in front of him, but he didn't point it out because he felt that it was harmless. At least this little girl wasn't stupid and sweet. She was quite scheming. If he really married her in the future, it wouldn't be too tiring to get along with her. But this time, Ji Tianyue stepped on his bottom line. A little girl could be smart and sly, but she couldn't be without a bottom line. If even his sister, who had always been devoted to him, was scheming against him, then what wouldn't she be scheming against? Was she really the girl in his mind? While he was pondering, Ji Tianyue had already sorted out her emotions and jumped into the car. She held Ji Shinyue's hand and smiled. "Sister Shinyue, it's really you. I didn't recognize you just now because you were in disguise. I was so silly until now. I was still worried about how you would come. Sister, have your injuries healed? Does it still hurt? Does it feel uncomfortable?" The little girl chattered, her big eyes full of concern. "Oh right, sister. After you ran away, Brother Rongyue has been very guilty, worried that your injuries would worsen. Although he wanted to break off the engagement with you, he didn't want you to delay your treatment because of this matter and make him feel guilty for the rest of his life. Fortunately, he finally found you and came with you. Seeing that sister is fine, I'm relieved." Ji Shinyue originally had a smile on her face, but after hearing Ji Tianyue's words, the smile on her face slowly turned cold. Did this little girl really think her sister was stupid? Her little sister's words sounded as if she was full of concern for her elder sister, but every word and sentence implied that the reason why Ji Shinyu and Rongyue Tianlan appeared at the same time was because Rongyue Tianlan felt guilty about her injuries, so she was concerned about her and went with her. She was still implying that Rongyue Tianlan didn't love her, his fiancé, although what the little girl said was all true. But to say it in front of so many people, her motives were not pure. She couldn't help but feel disgusted. After all, the little girl was still too inexperienced. She was still a bit too radical. However, this was also good. She had completely seen her younger sister's true colors. From now on, she could finally let go of her younger sister. There was one less thing to worry about in the palace, which was a good thing. Ji Shunyu naturally didn't want to argue with her sister at a time like this, and she was too lazy to do so. Moreover, no matter what Ji Tianyue's motive was, at least what she said was true. Romeu Tianlon had disguised herself and came to look for her. She felt wronged and became her coachman, probably because she felt guilty in the morning. She was still surprised that the scars on her body had healed slightly. Now she finally found the reason. Romeu Tian secretly healed her injuries again. This person was really obsessed with her injury. He probably wanted to use this to make up for the pain he had caused her by canceling the engagement. In fact, there was really no need for that. Ji Tianyue was still expressing her concern. Chapter 2752. Ji Tianyue was still expressing her concern, but Ji Xinyue was already impatient. She patted Ji Tianyue's shoulder lightly and said, "Tianyue, the palace drama is a good one. You can enjoy yourself. Forgive me for not keeping you company." She pushed her away and floated down. "It's getting late. Let's go in." She flew directly toward the entrance of the mountain. Ji Tianyue was speechless. She blinked her big eyes and tears came out. She looked at Romeu Tianlon with grievance and said, "Brother Romeu Tianyue, did Tianyue say something wrong?" Romeu Tianlon looked at her with a complicated gaze. If it weren't for the fact that this little girl's appearance and temperament were highly similar to the girl in his memory, he wouldn't care about such a child at all. She should be taught a lesson. Otherwise, who knew what kind of ugly things she would grow up to be, he said. "Don't make me think that you're repulsive. Repent and be saved." He rose and flew directly toward the entrance. Ji Tianyue was speechless. Her little face turned pale again. "Both of you, do you really want to break off the engagement?" The gatekeeper at the mountain gate asked again, with uncertainty. These two gatekeepers were recognized as experts in the Fanine continent. No one knew how old these two people were. In the hearts of the people of the Fanine continent, these two people had been here since ancient times. They came to the Misty Mountain to break off the engagement, so those who came here were all resentful couples. These two people had seen countless resentful couples parting at the foot of the mountain. There were those who fought with swords, those who ignored each other, and those who were indifferent and resentful. In short, at a glance, there were all kinds of differences. However, these two people in front of her actually came in the same carriage. Looking at their interaction, they didn't look like resentful couples, but more like a young couple. Why would such people spend so much effort to come here to break off the engagement? Could it be that they were just angry? These two people looked like a perfect pair. Wouldn't it be a pity to throw away such a good marriage just because of anger? Therefore, the tall and thin traveler guarding the mountain gate couldn't help but ask this question. Ji Xinyue felt that his question was strange. Could it be that he came to the Misty Mountain for an engagement? If an engagement needed to be held here, and if it was so troublesome, her imperial father probably wouldn't have arranged such an unlucky marriage for her when she was still an infant. She nodded. That's right. That tall and skinny walker took another look at Rong Juishan. This person was holding a folding fan in his hand and had a smile at the corner of his mouth. There was nothing strange in his expression. He didn't look like he was here to cancel the engagement, but more like he was here for a walk. The two of you annulling the marriage is not a joke. Not only do you have to go through all kinds of checkpoints to go up the mountain, there is also a nearly fatal test waiting for you under the marriage pillar. Marriage is not easy to come by. You should cherish it. The tall and skinny walker was a warm-hearted person. Like the auntie of the neighborhood committee, he began to persuade Zhang Zian earnestly. Ji Xinyue frowned slightly. I understand all of this. Divine Lord, you don't have to persuade me. The tall and thin walker did not give up. But the two of you seem to be getting along quite well and friendly. You don't look like a resentful couple who is in a hurry to separate. Getting along well? The short and fat walker also added, the two of you look very friendly. You came in the same carriage, and he is even protecting you. He felt that the problem was with Ji Xinyue, so his words were directed at Ji Xinyue. Chapter 2753. Facing the two Voidwalkers' earnest gazes, Ji Xinyue coughed and said, the two of you have misunderstood. This brother and I are actually brothers. It has nothing to do with politics. In order to make the two Voidwalkers give up, she added, he already has someone in his heart, and I also have someone in my heart. We shouldn't delay each other any longer. So we have to call it quits. The two walkers were speechless. The onlookers who were listening to the gossip behind them were also speechless. The two walkers looked at Rongyue Tianlan in unison. Rongyue Tianlan's face was expressionless. She just nodded and said, let's do as she says, and let them go. The two walkers had done what they were supposed to do, so there was nothing else to say. The tall and thin walker listed out the procedures and taboos when entering the mountain to cancel the engagement. Only when the two walkers expressed that they had remembered everything did they start to prepare to open the mountain gate. The Misty Mountain was extremely dangerous. In order to prevent the ferocious beasts from accidentally running out and hurting people, the entire mountain was covered with a divine enchantment. Only the two mountain passes in the south and north of the mountain could be opened using special methods. Once inside, life and death would be up to fate. After a series of hand gestures from the two walkers, a blue light door appeared on the mountain wall.
It was the real entrance to the mountain.
This light door would last for half a quarter of an hour after it was opened, and it would automatically close after people entered. Once the people inside successfully canceled the engagement, the light door would automatically open again, allowing the two people inside to come out. Of course, two people would go in, but it might not be two people coming out. Ji Xinyue was a straightforward person. She turned around and was about to enter when someone called out from behind, "Boss Shen, wait." Ji Xinyue turned around. The three Qi brothers finally gathered their courage and squeezed over. Third Elder Qi handed over a scroll and said, "Boss Shen, you can't use spells inside. This scroll is called the Painting of Heaven and Earth. In an emergency, you can recite the spell and enter the painting to hide." Ji Xinyue's expression changed. She was experienced and knowledgeable, so she knew the origin of the Painting of Heaven and Earth. It was an extremely rare treasure, the heirloom of the Qi family. It did have the function that third young Master Qi had mentioned. Usually, it would be a luxury to let others take a look at it. She didn't expect third young Master Qi to take it out for her to protect herself without batting an eye. This friendship. Ji Xinyu folded her sleeves and bowed. "Many thanks." She took the scroll from third young Master Qi's hands and said, "When I come out, I will personally pay you a visit and return it." She might not have any use for it, but she couldn't throw away the goodwill of others, so she accepted it without hesitation. Third young Master Qi's handsome face turned red again. This time, he was so excited that he stuttered. No need to be so polite, Boss Shen. No, Your Highness, we're already very happy that you accepted our gift. Oh right, take care. We will wait here for your triumphant return. Qi Lao kicked him from behind. He was there to break off the engagement, not to go to war. What triumphant return? Ji Shunyu smiled. She really did treat these three as her brothers. She raised her hand and patted old third Qi's shoulder. Don't worry, this kind of place is just a piece of cake for me. I'll be out soon. She only realized that something was wrong after she patted his shoulder. She was dressed as a princess now, and it seemed a little too bold to pat a man's shoulder like this. As expected, the gazes of the people around her were a little subtle. She coughed and retracted her hand. The Qi brothers' feet were light as a feather. Chapter 2754. She coughed and withdrew her hand. The three Qi brothers felt as if they were floating, and their hearts were also floating. They retreated back into the crowd as if they were dreaming. The redness on third brother Qi's face did not fade, and his mind seemed to explode with fireworks. Not only did such a noble princess ride in the same carriage as them for a few days, she even lowered herself to become friends with them. She really did treat them as friends. Too happy. Too excited. He wasn't dreaming, right? He pinched his thigh, wanting to see if he was dreaming or not. It didn't hurt. Could it really be a dream? Third brother, why are you pinching my thigh? Second brother Qi asked darkly. Third young Master Qi. The crowd suddenly parted, and Changbu Bai walked forward with large strides. He had clearly rushed here in a hurry, and there were even beads of sweat rolling down his forehead. His body was also covered in dust. He did not exchange any pleasantries and directly handed over a blood-red object to Ji Shinyu. "Your Highness, I, Changbu Bai, will only serve you in this life. This is Qilin resin that this one just hunted. Perhaps it will be of use to the princess." Qilin resin was an extremely rare type of fungus, and it was an excellent medicine for treating red wounds. No matter how serious the injury was, even if an arm was torn off, as long as this fingernail-sized bit was applied, it would immediately stop the bleeding. It was something that martial artists yearned for even in their dreams. Because it was rare and extremely difficult to harvest, it was considered a priceless treasure in the entire continent. Ji Shinyu looked at Changbu Bai's sweaty appearance and knew that he had specially come to harvest it for her. This kind of friendship could not be rejected. She accepted it without hesitation. "Many thanks, Brother Chang." Changbu Bai usually spoke harshly, but to the people he truly admired, he was sincere. "No need to be courteous, princess. This one wishes the princess a smooth return." Even Shi Shuangcheng came over to join in the fun. He was worthy of being a prince of the Western Sky clan, and his actions were generous. He directly handed over an exquisite pagoda sparkling with treasure light to Ji Shinyu and directly called her by her name. "Shinyu, this is the Stupa Pagoda. It can imprison all evil spirits. If you encounter a troublesome evil spirit, you can use this pagoda. Any evil spirit below heavenly demon level will be dealt with in this pagoda. Come, take it." Ji Shinyu. The onlookers. She naturally knew about this pagoda. It was one of the 10 great ancient divine artifacts and should be regarded as the national treasure of the Western Sky clan. Furthermore, it had a very special function. It was said that this item was part of Shi Shuangcheng's mother's dowry. His mother valued this item very much and directly said that this item could only be given to her future daughter-in-law. In other words, this item could be used as a token of love. Now that Shishuang City had sent this to Ji Shinyu, the meaning behind it was obvious. Shi Shuangcheng also had something else to say. "Shinyu, I will wait here for you to successfully cancel the engagement. When you come out, I will hold a celebratory feast for you and then bring you back." He looked at Ji Shinyu as if he was looking at his fiancée, and he was trying to poach her openly. Ji Shinyu. Everyone felt that their horizons had been broadened. This show was very satisfying. Countless gazes were cast towards Rong Yuetian, wanting to see what expression her current fiancé would have when he saw such a scene. Rong Yuishinlin stood there, lightly tapping the handle of the fan in her palm. She didn't seem to be out of the ordinary. Ji Shinyu did not want to accept such a gift. Chapter 2755. But he had kindly offered himself to her, so she had to be tactful in rejecting him. Ji Shinyu was about to reject him, but Rongyue Tianlan's arms suddenly rested on her shoulder, as if they were close brothers. "All right, if we dilly-dally any longer, this door will close. Brother, let's go in." Ji Shinyu was shocked by the word brother, and her hair stood on end when he hugged her. She was about to use her power to shake off his wolf arm, but he had already taken her and leaped into the blue door, disappearing without a trace. Everyone was also shocked by Rongyue Tianlan's actions, and they all looked at each other, unable to guess what was going on. The two gatekeepers also shook their heads. There were actually many strange people who came to handle the marriage annulment ceremony, but they had never seen such a strange pair before. After Rongyue Tianlan and Ji Shinyu leaped in, the blue door disappeared. Everyone watched the show, and some left contentedly, while some felt that it was not enough and wanted to see the final result, so they simply set up camp here and waited for the two to come out. Ji Tianyu stood in front of the big rock where the blue door had once appeared, staring at it in a daze. She pursed her lips, ignoring everyone's strange gazes, and also set up a tent in the valley, waiting for them to come out. Ji Shinyu felt that it was not an exaggeration to describe the mountain in front of her as piercing through the clouds. When she was outside the mountain, she looked up and saw that the misty mountain was not very high, at least she could see the peak. But after entering, she did not know if it was a visual effect, but the mountain was covered in clouds, and the main peak was directly submerged in the clouds, and she could not see the peak at all. There were no roads in the mountain, and the occasional winding path was created by the fierce beasts in the mountain, and some of their feces were still fresh. From the depths of the valley came the low growls and roars of various fierce beasts, making one's hair stand on end. Because spells could not be used here, no matter how high the mountain was, one could only climb it and could not fly. Eighth Highness, let's part here and meet under the marriage pillar at the top of the mountain, Ji Xinhua suggested. According to the rules mentioned by the two gatekeepers, it would be best if the two people who entered the mountain did not help each other. Otherwise, the hardships they would encounter would be doubled. Ji Xinyu only wanted to settle this matter as soon as possible and didn't want to cause any more trouble, so she felt that it would be better for the two of them to go separately. Rong Yuetian glanced at her and hugged her arms. Brother Ji, are you sure you can do it yourself? She didn't know what was wrong with this guy. Ever since he came in, he kept calling her Brother Ji, which made her hair stand on end. His gaze was clearly filled with distrust towards her martial arts. Ji Xinyu frowned slightly. I don't care about such a small mountain path. I've been to places that were even more dangerous than this, not to mention that I have a magic treasure in my hands. She flashed the map of the universe scroll and added, the two messengers also said that since they are here to break off the engagement, the two of them should be indifferent to each other. Once they help each other, I feel that I can watch someone die and not save them. Rongyu Ishinlin interrupted her. She clasped the folding fan in her hand. Her smile was like the mountain wind, a little cold. Ji Xinyu blurted out, You can do it, but I may not be able to do it. Rongyu Ishinlin closed the folding fan. Her eyes flashed slightly and focused on her face. So, you're saying that you... Dearest, it's the end of the month. Everyone take a look and see if there are any monthly votes in your pockets. Sometimes you don't see them today, but there will be another one popping up tomorrow. Cough, cough, Moo Moo urgently needs monthly votes. Wax. Chapter 2756. Ji Xinyu looked at him sincerely. Your Highness, you don't have to think too much. The only good thing about me is that I'm kind. Even if I see a dog or cat in danger, I'll reach out to save it, let alone someone in danger. What if I can't help but reach out to help and increase the danger we're in? It's not worth it, right? So let's split up. She didn't want to talk about it anymore, so she directly gave him a choice. How about this? There are two routes up the mountain. If you go east, I'll go west. Rongyue Tianlong glanced at her and smiled faintly. You're really impatient. He turned around and ran towards the west, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Ji Xinyu breathed a sigh of relief and ran towards the east route. Ji Xinyu felt that she was experienced and knowledgeable, but coming to this dangerous place called the Sacred Mountain was still an eye-opener for her. She had never seen most of the plants along the way. Some were crystal clear and made people want to pick them, while some were colorful but made people's hair stand on end. No matter what kind, Ji Xinyu couldn't touch them, because according to folklore, not a single blade of grass or tree in the misty mountain could be taken down the mountain, or else a catastrophe would befall. Of course, there were also many fierce beasts in this mountain, and there were all kinds of them. There were saber-toothed tigers with wings, silver wolves with horns on their heads, and even snake monsters that were dozens of feet long and had the appearance of a snake, but had countless centipede legs on their bodies. Among them, the saber-toothed tiger and the snake monster had attacked her before, but after a fierce battle, they were all dead souls under her broadsword. After running for a day and a night, she had already reached the mountainside. In this one day and night, she encountered 2 saber-toothed tigers, 3 silver wolves, 6 human bears, 8 bone eagles, and more than 10 other unknown ferocious beasts. It could be said that she had climbed up by stepping on the blood of various fierce beasts. Even though she had good stamina and high martial arts, she was still a little tired after a busy day. She lowered her head and looked at the broadsword in her hand. The originally green broadsword was now dark red because it had drunk the blood of all kinds of beasts. It looked a little fierce, and the blade was also a little curled. She found a large rock and sat down. She raised her hand to wipe the sweat off her forehead and shook her numb arm. She was actually a little puzzled. According to the rules mentioned by the 2 gatekeepers, If the two of them walked separately, they would not encounter too much trouble unless there were special circumstances. As long as one maintained a calm heart and mind, they would be able to pass safely. But hadn't she encountered too many dangers along the way? There were not many women in this world who were truly skilled in martial arts. It could be said that they were as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns. Most of the women who came here to cancel their marriage were ordinary women. If these women were to encounter these ferocious beasts here, just one of them would probably take their lives. There was no need to wait for the marriage annulment ceremony. On the other hand, she had encountered so many of them in one go, and every single one of them seemed to want to kill her, forcing her to deal with them with all her might. Could it be that the monsters that appeared here were automatically refreshed according to the actual abilities of the people who entered? Her martial arts were high, so these fierce beasts that ran out were fiercer than the previous one. And the higher she went, the fiercer the beasts she encountered. Ji Xinyu could not figure it out no matter how much she thought about it, so she simply stopped thinking about it. Chapter 2757. She ate a piece of rations, then polished the broadsword on a rock before putting it away. The climate here was extremely strange. The plants here looked like tropical plants, but once night fell, the weather would be extremely cold. Even the leaves of the trees were covered with a thick layer of ice armor. What was even stranger was that this kind of cold didn't seem to come from the outside world, but rather from the inside of a person's bones. Ji Xinyu had been running and fighting all this time, so she didn't feel anything, but now that she had nothing to do, the cold immediately spread throughout her body. She sat there in a daze for a moment, and a thin layer of ice had already formed on her eyelashes. She cursed under her breath. This damned place. Looks like it doesn't want people to rest. But she was really tired. After not being able to use spells, her body's functions weren't as good as before, at most a bit stronger than a normal person. She used to be full of energy after fighting monsters for 3 days and 3 nights, but now after running for 1 day and 1 night, she felt her hands trembling and her legs weak, as if she was powerless. If she ran into a beast in this state, it would be dangerous, so she needed to rest. She found a leeward mountain wall, cleared the surroundings, and made a fire. Then, she sprinkled a circle of sulfur around her to prevent snakes and insects before sitting on a tree stump to rest. The night here was also different from other places. The moon outside was both round and incomplete. Even when she came here, it was still a crescent moon. However, the moon here had always been round. It hung there like a wheel. Its color was golden with a hint of purple, looking strange yet beautiful. Ji Xinyu looked at the moon for a while, watching it become more and more purple, brighter and brighter. She didn't know why, but the color of the moon gave her a strange feeling of familiarity. She closed her eyes, wanting to take a nap. But unexpectedly, she was too tired and fell asleep in a daze. She had a dream. In the dream, there seemed to be a woman dancing under the moonlight. She couldn't see the woman's face clearly, but faintly felt that the woman was extremely beautiful and even familiar. She couldn't help but want to take a closer look, but unexpectedly, after a cold wind, the surroundings suddenly became a world of ice and snow. The woman was lying in the snow. She didn't seem to be injured, but there was blood flowing out of her mouth. It seemed like she was poisoned. What was even stranger was that Ji Xinyu could clearly see that her lips were bleeding, but she still couldn't see her face clearly, as if there was a thin veil between them. She could only vaguely feel extreme despair and extreme coldness, making her heart feel as if it was weighed down by a weight, falling and falling. Just as she was about to walk closer, a thick fog suddenly appeared around her. The woman in the fog seemed to be carrying ice and snow as she whispered into her ear, "Don't fall in love with him." His voice was like a line of ice, directly entering Ji Xinyu's ears, causing her to shiver. "Don't fall in love with anyone?" She couldn't help but ask. "Don't love him, don't love him." The voice kept repeating in Ji Xinyu's ears. Every time it was repeated, her body would turn cold. In the end, she felt as if her entire body was frozen like an ice pillar. She was impatient and was about to shout, "Who is he?" when a warm current suddenly rushed through her frozen body. She trembled and woke up. The fog in front of her quickly dispersed, and her vision became dark. When she came to her senses, she found that her eyes were closed. Chapter 2758. She tried her best to open her eyes, but her eyelids seemed to be glued together, and she couldn't open them for a while. It was as if she was frozen. Her body was obviously cold to the bone, but there was also a trace of warmth from the outside world that flowed into her body. She felt like she was an ice shell, and her soul was bound in this ice shell. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't break free, and that trace of warmth seemed to be trying its best to pull her out of this ice shell. This was the first time she had encountered such a situation. She suppressed her panic and tried her best to feel the warmth, and then let the warmth come to her eyelids gradually. She felt the ice melting from the corners of her eyes. She tried her best to open her eyes and finally lifted her eyelids. Then, she was so shocked that her eyelids trembled and they were almost frozen together again. When she was sleeping, she was resting next to a fire, but when she opened her eyes, she found that the fire was gone. In front of her was a lump of ice that looked like a fire. There seemed to be a flame in the lump of ice that was directly frozen, and it looked very strange and terrifying. This wasn't the most terrifying thing. The most terrifying thing was that she herself had become an ice sculpture. Her body was wrapped in a large layer of ice, and her whole body was frozen solid, becoming a sitting ice sculpture. Because she was facing the stone wall, half of her body was frozen with a big stone on her left, and she couldn't even move a finger. No wonder she dreamed of a world of ice and snow. No wonder she dreamed of being surrounded by cold wind. It turned out that in reality, she was frozen into a lump of ice. She rolled her eyes and looked at the moon in the sky. The moon had just moved to the west, but it was still far from dawn. If she didn't think of a way to thaw it in time, she was afraid that she would lose her life here. The moment she realized that her situation was bad, she began to circulate the inner force in her body, trying to use it to thaw the layer of ice outside. But after a while, she knew that this method didn't work. The circulation of inner force could indeed thaw the ice, but the layer of ice on her body wasn't ordinary. Only a trace of warmth on her back, circulating around her mouth and nose, could make her blood flow slightly better. Otherwise, she would have been frozen into a lump long ago, and she wouldn't even be able to breathe. There was someone behind her. At this time, the person behind her could only be Rongyue Tianlon. Ji Xinyue's heart jumped, and she couldn't help but ask, "Eighth Highness." There was no movement behind her. "Hey, Rongyue Tianlon, is that you?" There was still no response from behind her. She couldn't even hear anyone's aura behind her. Ji Xinyu felt a little scared. "Hey, say something." Her voice was muffled by a layer of ice. Finally, there was some movement behind her. A gust of wind seemed to blow beside her ear, as if someone had sighed beside her ear. Ji Xinyue's hair stood on end. "Rongyue Tianlon, why are you pretending to be mysterious again?" She choked on her words. There was a slight rustling sound behind her. Then, her vision blurred, and a face appeared in front of her. When Ji Xinyu saw this face clearly, her mouth fell open, and her heart almost stopped beating. It should be a human face. The reason why he said it should be was because the shape of the face was indeed that of a human face, but it had no facial features. She even had long hair on her face. If one looked at her back, they might even think that she was a beauty. But what Ji Xinyu saw was a face that was like a puppet's, without any facial features. And this face was right in front of her on the ice shell, just a centimeter away from her face. Chapter 2759. What kind of monster was this? Ji Xinyu's feet were almost cold. Her body was already cold, but this time, it was even colder. The monster's face and her face were separated by a thin layer of ice for a while. Suddenly, it raised its head and moved away a little. Ji Xinyu's eyes could finally see something else, and she could also see the monster's general appearance. She almost gasped. The monster's upper body was indeed human, and it was even wearing a robe. But its lower body was a python. The white snake's scales brushed past the ice around her, making a swishing sound. The snake's body almost wrapped around her entire body. a snake beauty. But how could such a face without any facial features be considered a beauty? Ji Xinyu's body was frozen in the ice shell, unable to move. She could only watch as the snake beauty coiled around her, causing her hair to stand on end. The snake beauty circled around her a few times, as if it wanted to remove the layer of ice around her, looking for a way out. Ji Xinyu even saw its tail slap her face. This situation was like a nightmare. The snake beauty coiled its head back and faced her face again. Then, a thin slit appeared where its mouth was, and the slit grew bigger and bigger. It twisted into the shape of a mouth, and suddenly a human voice came out. "Why don't you have a face?" This voice also sounded like it was made by a machine, and it was indescribably strange. Ji Xinyu didn't know what it was doing, and she didn't know why it said this. She didn't have time to think about this, and her mind was filled with thoughts of how to escape. How can a person in your heart not have a face? Have you never thought of love? Have you never thought of men? The snake beauty continued, its voice full of doubt. Ji Xinyu. The snake beauty moved its head closer. "Tell me, what kind of man do you like? Try to picture his face in your mind." Ji Xinyu stared at it without saying anything. The snake beauty lowered its head, as if thinking for a moment, and then slowly raised its head. Ji Xinyu was shocked. This time, the snake beauty finally had a face. His brows were like distant mountains, his eyes were like autumn waves, his nose was like a jade carving, and his lips were like a painted pill. His long eyelashes fluttered like two little fans, and right now, he was blinking at Ji Xinyu. "Do you like this?" His voice was neutral and even seductive. Ji Xinyu's heart trembled, and she bluntly spat out two words, "transvestite." The expression in the snake beauty's eyes dimmed, and those soul-stirring eyes lost their luster. "You don't like it?" Her voice was as bitter as an abandoned wife. Ji Xinyu rolled her eyes and ignored it. Only a ghost would like a transvestite that was neither male nor female. The snake beauty lowered her head again, and when she raised it again, her expression had completely changed. His sword-like eyebrows flew straight to his temples, his starry eyes were sharp and spirited, and his thin lips were pursed like the edge of a knife. He looked like a proud and indifferent hero. At this moment, this hero's face was looking down at her, and he said proudly, "Do you like this young master?" Ji Xinyue. Monster. In other words, she still didn't like it. That hero's face frowned, and this time, it didn't lower its head, and its facial features directly undulated in front of Ji Xinyu's eyes, like a clay figurine. A moment later, it changed its face again. This time, his face was bronze, his eyes were like copper bells, and there was even a beard growing out of his lips. He looked like a majestic man. Chapter 2760. The man scowled at her. "Little girl, you must like how manly I am now." Ji Xinyu. She had the urge to throw something at his face. She simply lowered her eyes, not looking at the snake beauty's various facial expressions. The snake beauty seemed to have seen a lot of people, changing one face after a while and another after a while, changing faces like a Sichuan opera. The people it changed into had all kinds of personalities, all kinds of characteristics, and even their voices changed with their faces. When it should be feminine, when it should be feminine, when it should be boorish, when it should be boorish. The snake beauty used all its skills, as if it wouldn't give up until it changed into a face that Ji Xinyu liked. Ji Xinyu didn't have such a bad taste. In the end, she just closed her eyes and let it do whatever it wanted. So much time had passed, it should be dawn soon, right? Once the sun came out, the mountain would immediately turn into a scorching heat, and the ice on her body would automatically melt. Once she regained her freedom, she would immediately cut this perverted snake into 17 or 18 pieces. Let's see if it can still do this. At first, Ji Xinyu thought that the ice on her body was caused by the snake beauty, but after a while she knew that wasn't the case. This was because when the snake beauty circled around her, the mouth that had transformed into a human would extend its fangs from time to time, gnawing here and there on the ice around her body. It was obvious that the snake beauty wanted to break the ice and swallow her. It seemed that although the ice made her suffer a lot, it had also become her protective armor. The snake beauty kept showing off all kinds of handsome faces to her. It definitely wasn't because it was bored. It must be because it was particular about something. Although Ji Shenyu couldn't figure out the reason, she didn't want to run away with its transformation. Especially since the snake beauty had a pair of charming eyes. When it stared at her, Ji Shenyu had a feeling that it could read the deepest part of her heart. This feeling was uncomfortable, so Ji Shenyu let the snake do whatever it wanted, and didn't look at it. Time passed minute by minute, and the moon in the sky moved inch by inch to the west. The snake became more and more irritable, desperately trying to make Ji Shenyu look at it again, but she just wouldn't open her eyes. Haha, I know, you must like people like this one. A clear and magnetic voice suddenly sounded in Ji Shenyu's ears, with its usual languid and casual tone. Ji Shenyu's heart trembled as she subconsciously opened her eyes. In front of him was a familiar face that could topple cities. Black hair, a blue robe, a folding fan, and a faint smile. This was clearly Rongyue Tianlan's face. The snake beauty's transformation technique was still extremely advanced. Other than the lower half of its snake body, the upper half of its body could transform into anything. Even the scales on its body could change according to the person's identity. The robe covered its lower body. At a glance, it looked like Rong Tianlan was right in front of it. It slowly approached Ji Shenyu's side, its watery eyes looking at her. "Shenyu, actually like me, right?" Its expression and bearing were extremely similar to Rong Yuetian's. Even the way it held the fan was exactly the same. Ji Shenyu's heart skipped a beat. She looked at it from the corner of her eyes. What nonsense are you talking about? Say that she liked Rongyue Tianlan? Was this snake still asleep? She had always been indifferent to this person. When they first met, she was even disgusted. Although she wasn't disgusted now, her mood would be inexplicably terrible every time she saw him. Chapter 2761. Although she didn't dislike him anymore, every time she saw him, her mood would be inexplicably terrible. She had the urge to kick him far away. Although this feeling was strange, it couldn't be love, right? She knew that her feelings towards Rongyue Tianlan were very complicated, and even she couldn't figure it out. But it could be said that she instinctively hated him. It could also be said that they were not on the same path. They could even be strangers. At most, she could treat him as an ordinary friend. The only thing she couldn't say was that she liked him. Even if she liked Rongyue Tianhuan, it was impossible for her to like this Eighth Highness. However, the snake beauty opposite her became happy. It moved closer to her and tapped the ice layer near her face with its fan. It looked at her with sparkling eyes. You like me, but you don't dare to admit it. Even in the depths of your heart, you rejected it because your subconscious thought that I was the source of so much harm to you. You instinctively felt that I was dangerous, and you were afraid that you would be hurt beyond redemption. So you buried your heart deep. You buried it too deep, and even you were deceived. You actually hypnotized yourself that you would never like me. The snake beauty spoke slowly, using Rongyue Tianlan's voice. It was elegant, but it pierced straight into one's heart. It moved closer and closer to her, its handsome face almost touching hers. Its eyes seemed to have a whirlpool that wanted to suck in a person's soul. Ji Shenyu looked as if she was hypnotized. She didn't speak anymore. Ripples flashed across the snake beauty's eyes, as if it was proud. It slowly leaned its forehead against Ji Shenyu's forehead. Little Shenyu, admit it. You like me. I am the person in the depths of your dreams, the love of your life. For me, you can give up anything, even your life. Ji Shenyu seemed to be completely under its control. She repeated what it said. However, she changed the relationship. For example, she said the last two sentences, "For you, I can give up anything, even my life." The snake beauty smiled in satisfaction. Good girl. Long tentacles extended from the hair on its head, drilling towards Ji Shenyu's forehead. Tentacles were originally extremely soft and tender, but this snake beauty's tentacle was like a sharp needle, slowly piercing into the layer of ice that even its fangs couldn't bite through. The blood-red line was about to touch Ji Shenyu's skin on her forehead. The snake beauty's eyes grew brighter and brighter, and the scales all over her body trembled in excitement. This woman was a rare divine monarch, and she was still a virgin. Her blood was the purest, and her soul was the purest. As long as its tentacles pierced her forehead, it would be able to suck her brain juice and devour her soul. Its power would increase tremendously, and it might even be able to transform into a human. Just as the blood-red tentacle was about to touch Ji Xinyu's forehead, her eyes suddenly blinked, and a mocking smile appeared on her lips. "I like you? Are you out of your mind?" The snake beauty was stunned. The blood-red tentacles seemed to have hit an extremely hard barrier and could not move forward any further. Not only that, but the small part that had drilled into the ice was also frozen by the ice. What was even more bizarre was that the ice seemed to be contagious. It quickly spread along the tentacles to the top of the snake beauty's head. The snake beauty's expression changed greatly. This woman wasn't fooled. He didn't fall for its hypnotic spell. Otherwise, this wouldn't have happened. It desperately tried to pull back its tentacles, but how could it do that in such a short time? Chapter 2762. It was also at this moment that Ji Xinyu, who had been trapped in the ice and unable to move, suddenly moved. She abruptly raised her arm, and with a crashing sound, the ice around her shattered in an instant. A large saber appeared in her palm, and the saber light rippled with a circle of bright light under the moonlight. It directly chopped down on the top of the snake beauty's head, where her tentacles were. The snake beauty let out an extremely shrill hiss, and her entire body, the entire snake suddenly split from the middle, split in half. It was a standard split in half, with both sides of the same size. Even if one were to measure with a ruler, one might not be able to split it so evenly. The two halves of the snake beauty's body fell in two different directions, and milky white blood splattered in the air like a flower, and then sprayed on the ground. As if it was raining milky white blood, Ji Xinyu retreated in time, and did not get sprayed by the snake's blood. She took a light breath. Her hand that seemed to be holding the knife was very steady, but the cold sweat in her palm had almost soaked the handle of the knife.
Just a little bit more.
She had almost fallen into this stinky snake's trap. She had almost been led by the nose by this stinky snake. Fortunately, she had woken up in time. Her feelings towards Rongyu Tianlan were indeed a little complicated, and unlike other people, she seemed to hold a grudge against him. But the most important thing was that this person had affected her whole life, and caused her life to be a lot bumpy. Wasn't it normal for her to have such feelings towards such a person? Saying that she liked him? And that she would be willing to die for him. She was talking in her sleep. If possible, she would rather let him die. She kicked half of the snake's body and sneered. "I like him? Who does he think he is? He's a playboy, and I don't want him even if he was given to me for free. You even transformed into his appearance to seduce me, and even asked me to die for him. Is your brain made of tofu? Tiske, if you didn't transform into him, I might have been merciful and left you with an intact corpse. But since you've turned into him, then don't blame me for using you to practice my knife." At this point, she seemed to have noticed something. She raised her head abruptly, and the broadsword in her hand almost chopped down subconsciously. Not far away stood a person with picturesque features and a poetic elegance. He held an oil paper umbrella in his hand, and his ink-black hair draped over his shoulders. He stood in the white snow with the umbrella slightly slanted. The green trees and rocks behind him served as a foil to him.
It was Rongyu Tianlan.
His eyes were as deep as two wells as he faintly said, "Did you have a good time chopping them?" Ji Xinyue. She looked at the dead snake that had been cut into two halves on the ground, and then looked at him. She gripped her knife warily. She clearly saw Rongyu Tianlan heading towards the west. Logically speaking, her route shouldn't coincide with his. How could he appear here? Could it be that this was a clone of the stinky snake? Ji Xinyu really wanted to give it another try. However, the aura of the person in front of him was too strong. She was no different from the real Rongyu Tianlan. Ji Xinyu couldn't decide whether to cut her or not. In the blink of an eye, Rongyu Tianlan had already arrived in front of her. It was a dangerous distance, less than a foot away from her. He was within the attack range of her broadsword. Ji Shinua felt a little itchy. He tilted his head and looked at her. The corners of his lips curled up slightly and he smiled gently. Do you want to try cutting me again? He was dressed casually, and a faint cold fragrance lingered at the tip of her nose, making her nervous for no reason. Was this real? Chapter 2763. Ji Shinua's intuition told her the answer. She subconsciously took a step back and asked, "Why are you here?" Rong Yuishinlin didn't answer. Instead, he slowly circled the dead snake twice and commented, "You cut it with great skill." Even the nose was cut in half. It was so even and neat. It seems that your hand was very steady when you cut it, even steadier than mine. Ji Shinua was speechless. She lowered her head and looked at the dead snake. The dead snake still maintained its appearance before it died. In other words, it still looked like Rong Yuishinlin, but it was cut in half. One was lying on the ground, and the other was standing in front of her. Although she knew that the one lying on the ground was fake, Ji Shinua still had a strange feeling. She took another 2 steps back and smiled. "You flatter me.
You flatter me.
My knife has always been steady." Rong Yuishinlin narrowed his eyes and looked at her. He smiled coldly and said, "If you cut the real me, would you also be so steady?" Ji Shinua was speechless. "This," she coughed and said, "of course I wouldn't cut the real you like this. I can still distinguish between the real and the fake. Don't worry, I only cut the fake, not the real one. I can't distinguish." Rong Yuishinlin suddenly sighed.
Ah!
Ji Shinua didn't understand what he meant and looked up at him. Rongyue Tianlan stopped talking halfway. He circled around the dead snake again and brushed his sleeves across the dead snake's body. A ball of light flashed past, and the dead snake finally no longer looked like Rongyue Tianlan. It had become a real snake in two. As he did so, he said casually, "Even though I know it's fake, I still feel uncomfortable when I see my other self being cut in half here. Do you feel good when you see me being cut in half?" Ji Shinua was speechless. She touched her nose and said, "It's normal. After all, it's fake." She felt that Rong Yuishinlin was a little evil at this moment. He seemed to be serious about her cutting the fake Rong Yuishinlin in half. After thinking about it, she decided to comfort him. "Your Highness the 8th Prince, don't worry. Although you once tricked me and caused me to suffer a lot at a young age, I also know that you didn't do it on purpose. You also have your own difficulties. I don't have many good points, but I have always been magnanimous and don't bicker with people. So I don't take the matter of you tricking me into an old lady to heart, so I won't really cut you down. After all, although we can't be husband and wife, we can still be considered friends. I won't point my knife at my friends." "Friends?" Rong Yuishinlin smiled. Was always good-looking, his smile now even better. "Brothers?" Ji Shunyue. "I guess so. Where's Tianheng?" Rong Yuetian stared into her eyes. "Tianheng?" Ji Shinua took a moment to realize who he was referring to. Rong Yuetianhuan. Although he wasn't very serious, he was her best friend. The two of them had gone through life and death together. Ji Shinua curled her lips and said directly, "You're different from him." Rong Yuishinlin glanced at her and turned to leave. Ji Shinua didn't expect him to leave so confidently. She paused for a moment, but still rushed over and asked the question she wanted to ask just now. "How did you get here?"
"You took the road to the west."
"I went astray," Rong Yuishinlin said without looking back. Chapter 2764. "I went astray," Rong Yuishinlin said without looking back. "Went astray? That was too far off the mark." Ji Shinua rubbed her nose speechlessly. "I don't think you could have gone astray." Rong Yuishinlin suddenly stopped. Ji Shinua was not prepared and almost bumped into his arms. She quickly took 2 steps back and looked up at him in surprise. Rong Yuishinlin said expressionlessly, "I don't have a good sense of direction. What's so strange about me going astray?" So, this immortal had a poor sense of direction? No wonder he wanted to follow her just now. Sure enough, the heavens were fair sometimes. They gave him an excellent aptitude and allowed him to cultivate to become a rare immortal. However, at the same time, they also gave him a weakness. For example, he had no sense of direction. It was common for women to have poor sense of direction. Ji Xinyue did not expect men to have poor sense of direction as well. However, seeing Rong Yuishenlin's handsome face, she kindly did not laugh at him.
Instead, she changed the topic.
What kind of snake was that? It could actually change its face. Heart image snake. Rong Yuishenlin only answered with 3 words. He, who is always humorous, was actually a man of few words. Ji Xinyue went through the snake's name in her mind. Suddenly, her heart skipped a beat. She remembered now. She had occasionally flipped through a book of strange beasts. On one of the pages, the characteristics of the heart image snake were written. In just a few strokes, it said that this snake was unique to the Misty Mountain and was extremely rare. It was good at reading people's minds and liked to bewitch them. Once a person's mind was bewitched by it, their brain matter would be sucked dry, and their soul would be sucked dry. They would never be reincarnated. However, this snake was extremely rare. There were probably only 1 or 2 of them in the entire Misty Mountain. It was not easy to encounter them. She did not expect to be so lucky to encounter this snake and almost lose her life. If she had not been quick-witted and got rid of the heart image snake's bewitchment in time, she would probably be a corpse now. She would not have to go through the marriage annulment ceremony with His Highness Rong Yuishenlin. No wonder people did not want to annul marriages even if they became resentful couples. It was too risky. She looked up and saw that Rong Yuishenlin had already walked a few feet away. The wind blew his white fox fur coat. White fox fur coat. He was wearing winter clothes. As for her, she was still wearing her autumn dress. It was only now that she felt cold again. A gust of wind blew, and she sneezed. She rubbed her hands and hurriedly rummaged through her storage space for winter clothes. However, after searching for a long time, he still couldn't find a single item. She usually only prepared clothes for the current season and had not prepared winter clothes yet. The wind outside was getting stronger and stronger, and her body was getting colder and colder. The coldness seemed to penetrate into her bones, as if it was going to freeze her blood. Forget it. I'll just wear another autumn dress to keep out the cold. One more dress is one more dress. She lowered her head and was about to flip through the slightly thicker documents when a fiery red fur coat was handed to her. Wear this. Ji Xinyue's eyes lit up. She was shivering from the cold, like a starving person seeing a bun. Naturally, she wouldn't be courteous with him at this moment. She quickly draped it over her body. Then, she was pleasantly surprised to find that the firefox fur cloak was extraordinarily warm. As soon as she put it on, she felt a warm current flowing out from the cloak and slowly enveloping her whole body. It made her almost frozen blood flow again, and her hands and feet were also warm. Chapter 2765. What was even rarer was that this cloak was obviously for women, and it was not too long nor too short on her body. It covered her from head to toe, and did not make her look bloated. Ji Xinyue could not help but give him a thumbs up. Eighth Highness, I didn't expect you to have the habit of carrying women's clothes around. You are indeed the famous young Master Elegant. You are so considerate to women. The woman by his side was lucky. She didn't have to worry about anything. This young master's preparation was not ordinary. Compared to his cousin, he was so much stronger. Rong Yuetian was speechless. He crossed his arms and tapped the vertical bamboo flute on his palm. He said calmly, I don't have the habit of carrying women's clothes with me. This cloak was originally prepared for you. Before coming here, he had done his homework. He had specially visited a friend who had come here once a few hundred years ago. He had learned about the strange climate of the Misty Mountain from him, so he had prepared everything well. After entering the Misty Mountain, he wanted to give her the fox cloak. He did not expect her to be so eager to leave him as if she was trying to get rid of trash. He was so angry that he turned and left. It was only now that he had the chance to give it to her. Ji Xinyue was smart. She knew Rong Yuetian's intention after thinking about it. She was still very grateful and saluted him. Thank you. Thank you. You are so considerate. Rong Yuetian only glanced at her and said coldly, You're welcome. He then strode forward. The impression that Rong Yuetian gave people was almost always gentle, elegant, and made people feel like they were bathed in the spring breeze. It was rare to see him being so cold to people. He used to give people the impression of being warm and approachable, but now he was cold and distant. Ji Shunyu could not figure out how she had offended him, but looking at him, he did not look like he would explain. Forget it. Once the marriage was cancelled, they would probably not have anything to do with each other anymore. There was no need for her to worry about this. Ji Shunyu looked up at the sky. The moon was already very far to the west. It was almost dawn. She looked up at the highest mountain peak again. They had already walked 2/3 of the way. At this rate, they would probably reach the marriage pillar before sunset. After finishing her business, she would be free. She had not rested well for the past few days. She had only slept for a short while and had almost frozen into an icicle. She had also fought a battle of wits and courage with the heart manifestation snake. She was actually very tired and wanted to rest, but the weather was so cold, forget it. Let's wait until we're done with our business first before taking a good rest. She then looked at Rong Yuetian, who was moving forward quickly in front of her. She felt that it was not reliable to let a person with no sense of direction lead the way, so she quickened her pace and rushed forward to walk side by side with her. I'll lead the way. You follow me. Rong Yuetian tilted her head and glanced at her. Now you're not afraid that the difficulty of traveling together will be doubled? Ji Shinyue's steps were quick, and she had unknowingly walked to the front. She didn't even turn her head as she said, walking alone. I even encountered a monster like the heart image snake. How much harder can I get? You're not familiar with the way. It wouldn't be good if you get lost. Fortunately, he ran to her place. If he ran to some other corner and couldn't find the way up the mountain, then wouldn't she have to wait under the marriage pillar until the end of time? Therefore, for the sake of both of them, it was better to go together. Rong Yuetian seemed to chuckle from behind. You're afraid that I'll get lost and not be able to reach the marriage pillar on time? That it's not good to cancel the marriage? Chapter 2766. This person's train of thought was truly abnormal. Every guess was spot on. Ji Shinyu admitted without hesitation. Yes, we both have our strengths. It's not a bad idea to partner up for once. I know the way very well, so I won't lead you astray. You can also avoid taking unnecessary detours. Rongyue Tianlan, who was behind them, stopped talking. He must have agreed with what she said. The two of them walked one after the other for almost an hour. Ji Shinyue was still a little tired, so she dozed off while walking. As he was walking, he tripped over something and almost fell. She quickly steadied herself and looked down. Suddenly, she took a big step back. It was a snake that almost tripped her. It was a snow-white snake with a head that looked like a human head without any facial features. A heart image snake. The snake lay there stiffly, motionless. Ji Shinyue's first thought was, no way. Am I back to square one again? However, she immediately dismissed this thought. This was because this heart manifestation snake looked slightly slimmer and slimmer than the previous one. It even had a pink flower on its head. More importantly, the way this snake died was different from the previous one. The previous one had been cut into two halves while it was still alive, but this one looked like it had been strangled to death. The surroundings were in a mess, as if someone had fought with a snake before it was killed. Moreover, the aftermath of the battle was quite tragic. Many trees and large rocks had fallen and shattered. Ji Shinyue had experienced countless battles, so she was still very knowledgeable. After her shock, she quickly checked the surroundings. She quickly analyzed that this battle should have happened 2 hours ago. Moreover, it looked like that person had suffered a loss first before he started to counterattack. Moreover, that person was obviously wary when he fought with this heart image snake. He didn't have the heart to do it until later on, when that person had probably suffered a great loss. He started to counterattack and strangled the snake to death. She even found the imprint of that person sitting on the ground after strangling the snake to death. In this misty mountain, there were only 2 people left. 2 hours ago, she was entangled with the heart image snake. Therefore, the person who was entangled with this heart image snake was self-evident. Rongyue Tianlan. He had accidentally walked in front of her and even encountered the heart image snake's entanglement. They even fought such a huge battle. It seemed like in terms of dealing with the heart image snake, he, an exalted immortal, was not as good as her, a divine lord. Although her battle was dangerous, she did not create such a tragic battle. That snake was even killed by her in one strike. She was not sloppy at all, and was very nimble. However, looking at the battlefield here, Rongyue Tianlan seemed to be injured. Only then did Ji Xinyu remember that Rongyue Tianlan had been following behind them all this while. She hurriedly turned around to take a look, but did not see his shadow. Where did he run off to? Could it be that he walked to the front? That's impossible, right? She did not seem to have seen him pass by just now. Could it be, was he lost again? The veins on Ji Xinyu's forehead bulged as she turned around and ran back. The sun rose, and the surrounding temperature rose rapidly. On the trees, on the flowers, on the rocks, in the thorny forest, the ice on everything was rapidly melting. By the time the sun had risen to the height of a pole, the earth had regained its verdant and lush greenery, as if it was a hot summer day. The expensive red fox cloak was spread on a flat big rock. Ji Xinyu sat miserably at a corner of the big rock, while Rongyue Tianlan lay horizontally on the big rock. His head was resting on one of her legs, and he was sleeping peacefully, with his eyes slightly closed. Chapter 2767. Ji Xinyu raised her head and yawned. She rubbed her eyes and began to count his eyelashes in order to resist the sleepiness. 1, 2, 20, 100. His eyelashes were quite long, almost the same as hers. After counting his eyelashes, she looked up at the scorching sun in the sky and wiped the sweat off her forehead. She mournfully cursed the ancestors of Misty Mountain in her heart. When it was cold, it would freeze people to death. When it was hot, it would heat people to death. This kind of weather was obviously crazy. At this time, she should have been hurrying along, but she had no choice but to rest. There was no other reason than Rongyue was injured and unconscious. When she found out that Rongyue Tianlan was missing and ran back to look for him, she thought that he had lost his way again. She did not expect him to be unconscious in the middle of the road. When she ran back to find him, a bear was rushing towards him. If she had been a step late, this immortal would have become food in the bear's mouth. Fortunately, she had arrived just in time. She brandished her large saber, causing the man to wail like a ghost and howl like a wolf and scamper away. Only then did she save him. He was unconscious and did not wake up. Ji Xinyu also did not dare to move him. She dragged him and carried him to a big ice stone to check his injuries. But just as she put him on, his body trembled violently and his teeth chattered. She wrapped the white fox fur around him tightly, but it did not help. She steeled her heart and took off the red fox fur coat that she had just warmed up. She spread it on the big stone and then put him on it. She wrapped him up again and again until he looked like a big baby in swaddling clothes. Ji Xinyu's medical skills were average. She could only treat headaches, fevers, and injuries. She could deal with small illnesses and disasters, but she could not do anything about serious illnesses and injuries. She had already checked him roughly. Other than his private parts, she did not see any external injuries. He should be suffering from internal injuries, but Ji Xinyu could not find out where his internal injuries were. His face was very pale, but his forehead was burning hot. He was obviously having a high fever. Ji Xinyu took out a few antidotes and medicines to treat various internal injuries from her medicine bag. She thought that there must be something to treat the illness, so she gave him a few of each medicine and stuffed it into his mouth. She melted some snow for him to swallow. Probably because she was too anxious, she stuffed too much medicine into his mouth, and he accidentally choked. After a bout of intense coughing, more than half of the pills were coughed up and sprayed all over the floor. But there was an advantage. He coughed and woke up. He opened his eyes in a daze and subconsciously spat out the remaining pills in his mouth. At a glance, he recognized the type, and his handsome face suddenly turned black. He casually threw away those pills. Ji Xinyu's heart ached as she looked at the pills scattered all over the floor. Suddenly, she saw another handful of pills scattered on the floor. She raised her head and met Rongyue Tianlan's watery eyes. He didn't say anything, but she was delighted. She ran to him and said, "You're awake. Hey, why did you throw away all these pills? There are quite a few of them that are very expensive." She didn't hide anything from him. Among the medicines she fed him, there were quite a few that were priceless. Even when she was injured, she couldn't bear to eat it. Now that she gave him a handful, he actually coughed it all up. Ji Xinyu's eyes were filled with pain. She didn't care about the money. What she cared about was the medicine. Rongyue Tianlan weakly rubbed his forehead. "These medicines are useless for my injuries. Even if they are useful, I can't eat so much and I can't mix them." Chapter 2768. Rongyue Shenlin rubbed his forehead weakly. "These medicines are useless for my injuries. Even if they are useful, I can't take so much and I can't mix them." She had taken so much medicine. Was she treating them like seasoning beans? Besides, there were strict standards for the combination of medicine and medicine. It was not something that she could mix randomly. Rongyue Shenlin secretly felt lucky. Fortunately, he woke up in time and coughed out all the medicine. Otherwise, this batch of medicine would not only not heal his injuries, but would also make him run more than 10 rounds. Rongyue Shenlin was a genuine miracle doctor. He was a little speechless about her blindness in medicine. Her medical skills were so bad. How did she live for so long? Since he had woken up, he naturally began to treat himself. He had not had a fever for many years. He did not expect that this time it would be so aggressive and directly put him down. His fever was too high. He wanted to take out some medicine from the storage space, but his hands were trembling and his legs were weak. Ji Xinyu could not stand it and directly stretched out her hand. "What are you looking for?" "I'll help you." For this kind of deity's storage space, without the owner's permission, outsiders could not directly enter. Only those who were extremely strong could take out those who were weak. Rongyue Shenlin's storage space was a little special. Others were in their sleeves, but his was in his chest. In order to take out the medicine for him, Ji Xinyu's small hand went around his chest 3 times. Ji Xinyu was more focused no matter what she did, so she only took out the medicine. She only paid attention to his storage space. She did not notice that it was his chest. After going around his chest 3 times, she finally took out the medicine. She was still proud and shook the medicine bottle in front of his eyes. "How is it? I didn't take the wrong one, right? You have so many medicines in your storage space. It took me a long time to find it." Rongyue Shenlin looked at her with an unfathomable expression, then looked at her other hand. "Okay, the medicine is out. Can you move your hand away?" Ji Xinyu was a little confused. She looked down at her hand then. She coughed and calmly withdrew her hand from his left chest. She said calmly, "Sorry, I was in a hurry to get your medicine and didn't notice." She quietly rubbed her hands behind her back, as if trying to wipe away the strange feeling she had when she pressed on the protrusion. At that time, the sky had just brightened and the sun had just risen. The surrounding profound ice had just begun to melt. Amidst the dripping water, under the sunlight, he could clearly see the blush on the calm girl's cheeks, slowly spreading like rouge. The white jade was dyed in red clouds. At such a close distance, he could even smell the faint fragrance of a young girl on her body. His mood suddenly improved. After taking the medicine, he began to meditate. Because Ji Xinyu had left him on the road, she still felt a little guilty. Seeing him meditating, she automatically acted as his guard. Ji Xinyu originally thought that after he finished meditating, he would be able to recover more or less, and the two of them would be able to travel together. Who would have thought that after he finished his meditation, he would say, "I'm so sleepy." Then, he collapsed on the red fox cloak, closed his eyes, and fell asleep. As luck would have it, his head happened to be resting on her lap. She naturally wanted to push him away. She wasn't his pillow. Why should she be his pillow? But just as she pushed his head down, his breathing began to quicken, as if he couldn't breathe properly. It's the last day of the month. Everyone look at the column of monthly tickets again. Click on it to see if there are any monthly tickets left. If there are, then vote them out, otherwise, they will be invalid. Mumu would feel the pinch. More than a month's worth of drafts were all sent out in 3 days. From today onwards, Mumu began to run naked again. Cough cough, there were still some during the day. Write and update now. Chapter 2769. She was so frightened that she hurriedly put his head back on her lap. Only then did his breathing become even again. Ji Shinue didn't know if this was another way for him to recuperate, so she didn't disturb him. In order for him to recover quickly and go through the annulment ceremony, she endured it. In such a dangerous place, he could sleep soundly, but she couldn't. She forced herself to stay awake and guard him. Then, she realized that his face seemed to be paler than when he first entered the mountain, and he was also a little travel-worn. Her eyes fell on the jade flute hanging from his waist again. The flute was emerald green, but there was a faint bloodstain on the top. She curiously took the flute and looked at it, and even smelled it. After analyzing the freshness of the blood, she was sure that it hadn't been stained for long. Just 4 to 6 hours ago. What had she been doing 4 to 6 hours ago? Yes, she had been frozen in the ice shell and entangled by the snake beauty at that time. He should have already defeated the snake beauty who was entangled with him, right? So he played the flute to celebrate? Although this guess was a little silly, Ji Shinue knew that with Rong-Yue Tianlan's casual personality and someone who didn't play by the rules, he could really do it. Her gaze fell on his lips again. His lips were extremely perfect, and the color of his lips was also very beautiful. Ji Shinue heard that in the early years, Rong-Yue Tianlan's lips were rated as the lips that women in the Fanning continent dreamed of kissing the most. Of course, this was just a rumor. Ji Shinue had always scoffed at rumors and didn't believe them at all. But now, looking at the lips in front of her, Ji Shinue suddenly felt that rumors were sometimes true. For example, Rong-Yue Tianlan's lips, when he slightly curled the corners of his lips and smiled, Ji Shinue's mind would always think of the words evil man. Now, there were faint traces of blood seeping out from the inside of his lips, and the lines on his lips were also a little broken. It looked like a delicate flower petal that had been crushed, and one couldn't help but feel sorry for him. Ji Shinue carefully sized up the degree and shape of his lips, and then analyzed that the tear on his lips was caused by the flute. He could work so hard even after playing the flute. What was he after? Logically speaking, he seemed to have been seriously injured after defeating the snake beauty. In such a situation, even if he wanted to play a tune to ease his tension, there was no need for him to fight so hard, right? Then why was he doing this? Could it be that there was another use for him to boast? He was an exalted immortal, so his musical instrument should not be just a musical instrument. It should be a Dharma artifact as well. She rubbed her temples and remembered that she had a nightmare when she was frozen in the ice shell. Although she couldn't remember what the nightmare was, she seemed to have heard the faint sound of a flute in her dream. Even when she was fighting a battle of wits and courage with the snake beauty, the flute never seemed to stop playing.
It was just that she was too focused at that time.
All her attention was on the snake beauty, so she didn't pay attention to the sounds around her. Furthermore, the sound of the flute was too soft, and it did not seem to be a frequency that humans should be able to hear. It was mixed with the sound of the wind, and if one did not listen carefully, one would not be able to hear it at all. He didn't think too much about it at the time, but now that he thought about it, he did hear a strange sound that was different from the sound of the wind. She frowned and thought about it again. She remembered that she couldn't move in the ice shell at first, and it was extremely difficult for her to even move her little finger. But after she saw through the snake beauty's nightmare, she suddenly could move. Chapter 2770. Only then could she break out of the ice and slash the snake. She recalled the timing of Rong-Yue Tianlan's appearance. It seemed that he was already there when she slashed the snake. Her heart tightened, and a conjecture emerged in her mind. Could it be that after he defeated the snake beauty, he rushed over and saw that she was also entangled with the snake beauty, so he came to her rescue? The reason why he did not directly kill the snake was probably because he had some scruples at that time, so he could only desperately use the sound of the flute to control it. Playing the flute would consume a lot of internal energy, so he ended up with injuries on top of his injuries. In the end, he could not hold on any longer and fainted halfway. Ji Xinhua was actually very smart. After so long in the Jianghu, her deductive ability was also extraordinarily strong. She sat there and began to analyze everything in her boredom. The more she analyzed, the closer she got to the truth. He was a mighty immortal and more than 1,000 years older than her. He had also been in the Jianghu for a long time, so he was much stronger than her in both experience and inner force. It didn't make sense that he would be seriously injured when fighting the snake, but she could fight the snake without any injuries. Ji Xinhua originally thought that she was stronger than Rongyu Tianlan in this aspect, but now it seemed that it was because he helped her behind the scenes. This person was actually very loyal. He was a good friend. Ji Xinhua was originally guarding him by his side. Seeing him sleep on her lap, she felt uneasy. But now that she had deduced so much, she felt that she owed him. If she continued to guard him like this, he would feel much better. She had always been a kind girl. In her gratitude, she moved his body slightly so that he could lie more comfortably. The weather was hot during the day, so he was sweating even when he was sleeping. Ji Xinhua took out a handkerchief and considerately wiped his sweat for him.
It was not bad.
During the period when Rongyu Tianlan was sleeping, no evil beasts came to attack and disturb them. Other than being a little tired, Ji Xinhua didn't suffer much. The place where she was resting had relatively fewer trees. The sun shone down from above, making people dizzy. Ji Xinhua was also a little dizzy. She was about to pinch herself to wake herself up when mighty immortal Rongyu, who was on her lap, suddenly moved slightly. She frowned slightly, as if in pain, and murmured 3 words, "Little moon." Ji Xinhua was stunned. Her heart felt like it was being hit by a hammer. This nickname, when she was very young, her father and mother used to call her that. They said that she was their little moon and that they would love her like a pearl or a treasure. However, this lasted for less than 100 years before she fell out of favor. From a small moon to a dim shooting star, the period of time she was pampered was too short. Even her memories of that period were blurry. She only faintly felt that her father and mother had called her that. After that, no one mentioned it again. Until the birth of his younger sister. It was said that when his younger sister was born, her mother, imperial concubine, dreamed of swallowing the moon in her bosom. Thus, imperial father gave his younger sister a nice-sounding name, Tianyu. He even jokingly called her Little Moon. Now, Little Moon had become Ji Tianyue's special nickname. No one remembered that she, Ji Xinyu, had once been called this way by others. Even she herself had forgotten. Now that she suddenly heard Rongyu Tianlan call out like this, her heart skipped a beat. Then she shook her head and smiled. He was still thinking about her little sister, wasn't he? It seemed that his love at first sight was very strong. Chapter 2771. It seemed that he had fallen in love at first sight. Such a dissolute person was a rare, infatuated person. Although she didn't quite understand his love at first sight, she still respected him. She lowered her head to look at this person. Such a handsome appearance, such a strong ability, such a good background. He was simply a good man. Such a man was hard to find even with a lantern in hand. It was no wonder that the women of this continent flocked to him. It was a pity that although this good man had once been engaged to her and should have brought her great glory, he had only brought her a great disaster. This showed that she and he were not fated to be together, so there was nothing to regret about breaking off the engagement with him. Moreover, looking at this scene, this person would most likely be her future brother-in-law. She didn't want any rumors about her and her brother-in-law to be gossiped about. Therefore, she should stay away from him in the future and avoid seeing him if possible. Looking at him sleeping soundly on her lap, she suddenly felt that this position was not good. After thinking for a while, she carefully placed his head on the fox fur cloak. She got up and broke some soft branches nearby, mixed them with some soft grass, and began to weave something. When Rongyue Tianlon woke up, it was almost noon. When he opened his eyes, he found himself lying on the fox fur cloak with a woven straw pillow under his head. There was also a faint smell of grass. The shade above his head was like a cover, blocking the sunlight. His gaze fell on a big tree not far away. Ji Shunyu was sitting on a rock, leaning against the big tree with her eyes closed and breathing evenly. She had fallen asleep. The sunlight sifted through the branches and leaves scattered on her body, making her beautiful face half bright and half dark. She looked very peaceful and quiet. Rongyue Tianlon slowly got up and hugged his knees as he looked at her sitting there sleeping. Then he looked at the straw pillow. It was as if something soft was slowly melting in his heart. It was inexplicably sweet and a little sour. When he left the Fanine continent, she was still a baby in swaddling clothes. Now, she had grown into such a beautiful and carefree girl. He didn't know why, but every time he saw her, he felt an inexplicable heartache and couldn't help but want to treat her well. This feeling made him confused. After thinking for a long time, he finally thought of a reason. He was probably feeling guilty towards her, right? After all, she was the only girl who had been cheated so miserably by him. Although he never liked to meddle in girls' business, he always wanted to meddle in her business. Especially when it came to her marriage, he was extremely worried. He was afraid that she would be coaxed by some lecher who was not worthy of her. Such a good girl should be matched with the best man and be cherished the best, and in his heart, he had yet to discover the best man. Don't worry, there's no hurry. In any case, they were immortal and had plenty of time to slowly search for them. Rongyue Tianlon realized that he really had a lot to worry about, but who asked him to feel guilty in his heart? No matter how much he worried, he was willing to do so. He saw that she was sleeping uncomfortably against a tree, her head nodding from time to time. After thinking for a while, he walked over and gently picked her up. Her body was very light. A cultivator's body was light to begin with, so in his arms, she was as light as a feather. Her soft and fragrant body lay firmly in his arms, making him somewhat reluctant to let go. However, his injuries hadn't healed yet. After holding her for a little longer, his forehead broke out in cold sweat. He didn't know what he tripped over, but he staggered and almost threw the person in his arms out. Chapter 2772. He placed her on the large cloak made of firefox fur. After doing all this, he felt a little weak, so he sat down as well. Ji Shunyu was really too sleepy. She slept for a long time, and more importantly, she slept very soundly and did not have a single dream. Only when she was half asleep, she seemed to hear a low sigh in her ear. "Why aren't you her?" At that time, she was still in a daze and thought about it unwillingly. She was her, and never anyone else. Why did she have to be her? Of course, this was just a thought in her sleep. When she woke up, she did not remember it at all. By the time she woke up after a good night's sleep, the sun was already in the west, and the sky was dyed red with the rosy clouds. When she opened her eyes, her body froze. She remembered that she had leaned against a tree and wanted to take a nap, but in the end, she fell asleep. It did not matter if she fell asleep, but why was she in someone's arms when she woke up? He was lying on his side beside her, and her head was lying in the crook of his arm. His other hand was holding a book, and his wide sleeves were hanging down, swaying in front of her eyes. What was going on? Ji Shunyu blinked her eyes. When she was in a deep sleep, she would be slow for a moment after waking up, and then she would be energetic again. Therefore, her brain was still sluggish, and she could not react for a while. "You're awake?" The sleeve in front of her eyes was removed, and she saw his handsome face above her, looking at her with a smile. Ji Shunyu nodded blankly. Yes, she turned her head in shock and was a little confused. It was rare to see her like this. At least Rongyue Tianlon had not seen it before. Rongyue Tianlon admired her expression for a moment and then said leisurely, "Since you're awake, then get up. My arm is numb from your pillow." Ji Shunyu jumped up immediately. She jumped too quickly and almost hit his tall nose. Rongyue Tianlon also sat up. "Why are you so flustered?" Ji Shunyu looked at the tree she had been leaning against to rest, and then looked at his leisurely face. Why would I be? Of course, I was the one who carried you here. You didn't sleep well there, and kept snoring, which disturbed me. Ji Xinyu's face was as red as a tomato. I don't snore. She then added, I never snore when I sleep. Rongyue Tianlon chuckled. That's why I said you didn't sleep well there. You were probably snoring, because you were hugging your neck. Since Ji Xinyue didn't know that he had fallen asleep, she naturally didn't have any evidence to prove that he didn't snore. She choked and couldn't help but say, let's just say I was hugging your neck at that time. But it's enough that you put me on this fox fur cloak. Then why did you let me rest on your arm? In her impression between the opposite sex, it seemed that only husband and wife would sleep in such an intimate position. Rongyu Ishinlin raised her eyebrows. If I don't let you sleep on my arm, don't tell me I'll let you sleep on my stomach? Ji Xinyu. She choked. Rongyue Tianlon said slowly, after you fell asleep, you kept snuggling into my arms, crying for hugs, and even put your head on my stomach. I weighed the pros and cons, and felt that it was better to let you rest on my arm than on my stomach. So, although Ji Xinyu didn't know what his sleeping posture was like, he had another choice. Chapter 2773. She gritted her teeth and reminded him, Your Highness, I think you can let me lie on this fox fur cloak alone. That way, I won't pester you. Rongyu Ishinlin raised his eyebrows. If you lie on it alone, where do you want me to lie? I can't possibly stand aside just to let you rest, right? After all, my injuries haven't healed. I can't stand for long. But I remember that you have a white fox cloak. You can lie on it. Ji Xinyu was not easy to fool. Rongyu Ishinlin crossed his arms. You want me to spoil the red fox fur, then spoil the white fox fur? How is it spoiling? Just lying down. Ji Xinyu did not understand Rongyu Ishinlin's thoughts. I can't use spells here, so I can't use the cleaning spell. Once the white fox fur is spread on the ground, it will soon be stained. You know, I've always cherished things. These two fox furs are my favorite. Rongyu Ishinlin looked at the red fox fur under him with a pained expression. Look, the fur on it is already dirty. As he spoke, he used his finger to lightly flick the fox fur. Ji Xinyu. She thought about it and felt that she would probably be with him for a few more days, so she had to remind him of some things. Your Highness, I think that although we are engaged, we are about to break off the engagement. In the future, we will be nothing. We still have to guard against men and women. Nothing? Rongyu Ishinlin raised his eyebrows and looked at her for a moment, then pondered for a while. Are we not even friends? Ji Xinyu. She thought for a moment and felt that he had been quite loyal throughout the journey. Before she went to bed, she was still thinking that she could treat him as a friend in the future. At this time, she naturally couldn't deny it, so she nodded. Of course we're friends. She then added sincerely, Actually, I already treat you as a friend. Rongyu Ishinlin held his chin and looked at her for a moment. A friend like Tianheng? Ji Xinyu thought about it and nodded reluctantly. Something like that. She had gone through trials and tribulations with him, and he had even saved her life several times, so it was not bad for her to treat him as a friend. It was just that she always felt that her feelings towards him were not the same as her feelings towards Rongyu Ishinheng, but she could not remember what exactly was different. It was probably because the two of them had different personalities that she treated them differently. However, they were friends who had gone through life and death together. Rongyue Tian stood up from the red fox skin. It turned out that after spending so much time and effort, he was only at the same level as Rongyu Tian Huan in her heart. It was even a little forced. Her Highness Rongyu, who had always been incomparably gentle and elegant, and who boasted that she was very popular among women, was somewhat hurt. She lowered her head and casually put away the red fox pelt on the ground. She didn't even look at it before putting it into her storage space. When he raised his head, he saw Ji Xinyu looking at him, as if she wanted to say something. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be that his position in her heart was higher? She was too embarrassed to say it. He paused and looked at her gently, encouraging her gently. Do you have something to say to me? Ji Xinyu finally said, I saw a few beetles and geckos crawling onto your red fox skin. You rolled them up and stuffed them into your storage space. Rongyu Ishinlin. Moonlight sifted through the leaves of the trees overhead. There was a big fire under the tree. 2 wild boar legs were roasting on the fire, golden and tempting. Chapter 2774. Ji Xinyue was the one who caught the wild boar and Rongyu Ishinlin was the one who started the fire. Ji Xinyue was in charge of killing the boar and Rongyu Ishinlin was in charge of roasting the boar. The two of them worked together, and according to Rongyu Ishinlin, neither of them was at a disadvantage. However, Ji Xinyue felt that she was at a disadvantage because she was doing all the hard work. Whether it was catching or killing the boar, shouldn't it be done by a man? Shouldn't a woman just sit there and wait to eat? Of course, she had always been fair and just. Even if she was a woman, she didn't want to be a freeloader. However, if she were to work with him, shouldn't she be the one to start the fire and roast the meat? Rongyue Tianlon looked at her and patted her shoulder earnestly. Brother Ji, your statement is directed at the relationship between a man and a woman. When a man sees the woman beside him as a woman who needs to be protected, then your statement is valid. However, we are brothers, friends who have gone through life and death together. How can there be such a clear distinction between brothers and friends? Naturally, whoever has the strength will do the hard work. My injuries haven't healed yet, so hunting is a little difficult. Naturally, I'll leave this to you. As for killing the boar, actually, since we're friends, I can tell you a secret. I have a phobia of blood. I don't usually kill. Ji Xinyue was speechless by his twisted logic. After a while, she said, You don't kill? Then why do you eat meat? I clearly gave you some dry food just now. The two of them had been busy for 2 days and slept for a long time. In fact, they were both hungry. Ji Xinyue had prepared some dry food, and just now, she wanted to share it with him as a friend. However, this guy directly stuffed her dry food back into the storage space and then asked her to go hunting. Rongyu Ishinlin fanned the fire with his folding fan while answering slowly, I have injuries on my body. I can only recover quickly by eating meat, so I have no choice. Finally, the 2 roasted pig legs were ready. He handed one to her. Here, try my cooking. Ji Xinyue took a bite and her eyes lit up. Good meat. Rongyu Ishinlin waved his folding fan proudly. I roasted it. Ji Xinyue gave him a thumbs up. The meat he roasted was 100 times better than hers. She never thought that roasting meat in the wild could be so delicious. She had been roasting for so many years, but she had never been able to reach such a standard. Do you want to learn? If you want to learn, I can teach you. Rongyu Tian said. Sure. Rongyu Ishinlin seemed to have thought of something. This is a secret technique of mine. If you want to learn it, you need to acknowledge a master. Becoming a disciple just to learn how to roast meat? Ji Xinyue didn't buy it. Then forget it. She had promised her master that she would only worship him as her master in this lifetime. Rongyu Tian didn't expect her to reject him so straightforwardly. He thought for a while and said, If you become my disciple, I can teach you some other things. He knew all kinds of things and many of them were top-notch. He really lacked a successor. For some reason, he had the idea of taking Ji Xinyue as his disciple. However, Ji Xinyue's pretty face darkened slightly. Not interested. Was he afraid that she would regret it and refuse to dissolve their marriage? He wanted to use the method of becoming her disciple to completely cut off her thoughts of him. She had no interest in him at all right? He was thinking too much. Apprenticeship? If she worshipped him as her master, then after he and Ji Tianyue got married, wouldn't her sister be her master's wife? Chapter 2775. That's not a joke. Rongyu Tianlon didn't understand what she was thinking. Hearing her firm refusal, his heart sank, but he refused to give up. Why did you refuse? I'm actually a very good master. I don't know how many people want to be my disciple, but I didn't agree. He thought for a while and asked, Are you afraid that Ziyun's sex overlord won't agree? I'm not really fighting with him for a disciple, I'm just teaching you some other skills. It won't conflict with what he teaches. Before he could finish, he was interrupted by Ji Xinyue again. You don't have to worry about this anymore. I'll only have one master in my life, and there won't be a second one. Rongyue Tianlan's heart suddenly sank. He vaguely remembered that when Shen Juli took Ning Xiuma as his disciple, he also said that he wouldn't take any other female disciples in the future and would let Ning Xiuma be his only one. Therefore, in Rongyue Tianlan's mind, this sentence was actually a symbol of a master-disciple relationship. Now that he suddenly heard Ji Shinhua say this, his heart felt like it was being squeezed by something. He frowned subconsciously. Did you and your master promise this? In the Sanskrit continent, it was not against a disciple having more than one master. Ji Shinhua's behavior was actually a little strange. He suddenly remembered that Ji Shinhua had said that she already had a sweetheart. Could it be that her sweetheart was her master, Ziyun's sex overlord? Ji Shinhua didn't want to be entangled with him on this topic, so she casually replied, "Yes, yes." She looked up at the sky and suddenly jumped up. "It's too late. We have to hurry." After putting out the fire, she jumped up to the treetops and ran forward. After running for a while, she suddenly realized that something was wrong. She turned her head and saw that Rongyue Tianlan didn't follow her. What was going on? She ran back again. Fortunately, she didn't run far and soon found Rongyue Tianlan, who was putting out the fire. She rubbed her eyebrows.
She had forgotten about this.
Starting a fire in the forest required the fire to be completely extinguished, otherwise it might cause a forest fire. Burn this sacred mountain, she helped to extinguish the fire and said, "Let's go. It's faster to fly on the treetops." Rongyue Tian shook her head. "My power has yet to recover, so I can't fly. I can only walk on the ground." His injuries were actually this serious? Remembering that she was also responsible for his injuries, Ji Shanyu felt guilty. He was so heavily injured that he couldn't even use his qinggong, so she naturally couldn't leave him alone. Otherwise, what would she do if he was dragged by some monster? She raised her head and looked at the top of the mountain. It was still far away. If he used qinggong to run, he could probably reach there in one night. However, if he had to cut his way through the thistles and thorns below, they would probably have to walk for another 2 days. Rongyue Tian looked at her tightly knitted brows. "Are you in a hurry? We have to get to the Pillar of Marriage early tomorrow morning. If we don't use qinggong, we won't be able to get there," Ji Shinyu explained to him. Rongyue Tian crossed his arms and looked at her. He was even more puzzled than she was. "Why must we arrive early tomorrow morning? When I left you the letter, I wrote that we'll meet at the Pillar of Marriage on time tomorrow. I can't break the promise," Ji Shinyu replied. Rongyue Tian raised his eyebrows even higher. "Haven't we always been together? Even if we can't get to the Pillar of Marriage tomorrow, it won't be considered breaking the promise, right?" Chapter 2776. But I've already told my master that I'll leave the mountain on time to meet him the day after tomorrow. If she couldn't reach the marriage pillar by tomorrow, then all the promises would have to be postponed. It turned out that the reason why she was so anxious was because she wanted to see her master. Rongyue Ishinlin stopped talking. Ji Shinhua suddenly grabbed his arm. "Let me take you away. We can't delay any longer." Without any explanation, she flew up with him. Rongyue Ishinlin glanced at her and simply pressed his whole body on her, not using any strength. In this way, his body was as heavy as an ordinary person's. Ji Shinhua carried him as if she was dragging a bag with a large rock. It was slightly difficult. After running like this for about an hour, Ji Shinhua couldn't take it anymore and fell directly to the ground. She was too anxious when she landed and even staggered, almost slamming Rongyue Ishinlin into a tree. The mountain slope here was very steep, almost 80 degrees, almost vertical. Ji Shinhua stood with the support of a big tree, panting slightly. She raised her hand to wipe the sweat on her forehead and pointed forward. "We just need to go over this mountain, and we can see the mountain with the marriage pillar." Rongyue Ishinlin leaned against the big tree and stood. "Looks like you're not completely ignorant about this mountain." Ji Shinhua said, "Of course, I've been inquiring about this mountain for a few years. I never fight an unprepared battle." Rongyue Ishinlin opened and closed the fan in his hand once in boredom. His tone was also calm. A few years ago, when I was still in another continent, you were already thinking about breaking off the engagement with me? Ji Xinyu answered matter-of-factly, that's right. Even though I know the chances of you coming back aren't high, I still have to make preparations, just in case you suddenly come back. I don't want to make a last-minute strategy. Reality proved that her preparations were very wise, and the strategy was not made in vain. Rongyu Ishinlin looked at her without saying anything. Ji Xinyue was a little confused by his gaze. Weren't you also in a hurry to break off the engagement as soon as you came back? We hit it off right away. Rongyu Ishinlin closed his eyes slightly and leaned against the tree. He came back in a hurry to break off the engagement because of that shadow in his heart. Then was she in a hurry to break off the engagement also because she had someone in her heart? You like your master? In the end, Rongyu Ishinlin still asked the question. She muttered to herself for a moment, as if she was considering her words carefully. I feel that his age is a little on the older side. If she remembered correctly, the Grandmaster of Ziyin should be more than 7,000 years old. No matter how pretty he was still twice as old as Ji Xinyu. Ji Xinyu did not pay attention to the first part of his sentence, but was angered by Rongyue Tianlan's last sentence. My master is only 7,200 years old. How is it big? There are so many people on this continent who are older than him. Her master, Grandmaster Ziyun, had a problem that only the people of his sect knew about. He hated it the most when people said that he was old. If anyone dared to say that, he would immediately turn hostile. Ji Xinyu remembered that when she was learning under his tutelage, she had unintentionally said, Master, you're my esteemed master. It was supposed to be an honorific, but in the end, she was directly punished by sect Master Ziyun to kneel on the steps and bask in the moonlight for an entire night. At that time, she was still feeling very wronged. She did not know what she had said wrong. Luckily, her eldest senior brother Feng Buji had given her instructions. Only then did she realize that she had violated her master's taboo. After that, she was never punished for the same reason again. It had already become a habit for her to worry about this. Chapter 2777. It had become a habit for her to worry about this. Now that she suddenly heard Rongyue Tianlan talking about her master's age, she couldn't help but refute him fiercely. Rongyue Tianlan's heart sank when he heard her strong refutation. He was even more certain that his guess was correct. She liked her master. After refuting, Ji Xinyu didn't forget to remind him, You can't say that my master is old in the future. You can't. Rongyue Tianlan's expression didn't look too good. He was about to say something when Ji Xinyu looked up and suddenly discovered something. She shouted happily, Lu Yuan bead. It's the Lu Yuan bead. She jumped up and was about to fly up. Rongyue Tianlan reacted quickly and grabbed her. What are you doing? Ji Xinyu pointed to a faint blue on a fan cliff not far away. There's a Lu Yuan bead there. My master has been wanting this for a long time. I'll go pick it and give it to him. He'll be very happy. Recently, because of her annulment, her master, sect leader Ziyun, had been worried about her. He was anxious and angry that she didn't listen to him. He had always been indifferent to her and even went into seclusion in anger. She heard from her senior brother that her master would come out of seclusion in 10 days. She had originally planned to welcome her master out of seclusion after the annulment. The timing was just right. Seeing how filial she was, her master probably wouldn't blame her anymore. Every time her master came out of seclusion, as his disciples, they had to prepare small gifts. Ji Xinyu was worried about what gift to prepare for her master, who had always been picky. Now that she found this, she suddenly felt as if she had found a treasure. The Lu Yuan bead was actually an extremely hard, petrified bead. Legend had it that if one was fated, one could see through it and comprehend the mortal world. Wearing it on one's forehead could protect one from all kinds of evil and poison. It was really a good treasure that could be used to show off, and was also useful. It could even be eaten. Eating it could cure all the poisons in the world. Of course, no one was willing to eat it. Usually, those who got it would treat it as a family heirloom and pass it down from generation to generation. Sect leader Zi Yun once said in front of his disciples that he hadn't seen what the Lu Yuan bead looked like in his life. If he saw the bead, he might be able to comprehend life and break free from the mortal world, thus entering the realm of immortals in this life. Because Ji Xinyu was not cared about by many people, there were not many people she cared about. Once she cared about someone, she would give her all to that person. Therefore, even though she often angered her master to the point of having a stroke because of her disobedience, she still took her master's words to heart. She also looked up a lot of information about the fate bead and learned about its characteristics and origin. She also firmly remembered it in her heart. The pearls of fate could only be found in the Misty Mountain, and their production could no longer be described as simply scarce. They could only be found by chance and not sought. This time, Ji Xinyu came to the Misty Mountain range with the intention of trying to find it. Therefore, she had been paying attention to her surroundings along the way. She didn't expect that she would be so lucky as to find one here. Naturally, she wouldn't let it go. As she spoke, she had already begun to adjust her sleeves. Rongyue Tianlan also looked in the direction she was pointing at. He was also experienced and knowledgeable, so he knew that Ji Xinyu was not mistaken. That was indeed the pearl of fate, but you can't pick that pearl. Rongyue Shenlin stopped her as she was about to fly up.
Why?
Ji Xinyue was surprised. Do you know how fate beads are formed? Huh. Ji Xinyu looked at him blankly. Chapter 2778. Huh. Ji Xinyu looked at him blankly. She felt that as long as she knew the function of the fate bead, she didn't care how it was formed. The fate bead is formed by the wraiths who entered this mountain and died here. The stronger the wraiths' resentment, the stronger their skills when they were alive, and the purer the fate bead formed, the better. The wraiths who could form the fate bead were all above the monarch god level when they were alive. Therefore, even after thousands of years of purification by the special spiritual chi of Misty Mountain, the resentment will not disappear. Instead, it will adhere to the surface of the bead. Once it is extracted, it will alarm the wraiths above and cause big trouble. This bead is the best of the fate beads. It should be the king's bead. Not only are there wraiths above the king's bead that are close to the level of the mighty deity, there will also be some small wraiths that protect the king. Once you provoke it, it will be no different from you poking a hornet's nest naked. Rongyue Shenlin's tone was indifferent as he began to educate her. The last analogy was a little rough and not like his style, but it was very vivid. However, Ji Xinyue had always been a person who refused to admit defeat and was full of adventurous spirit. There was nothing she couldn't get if she wanted to. Rongyue Shenlin's somewhat threatening explanation didn't scare her off. She still wanted to pick the bead. After listening to Rongyue Shenlin's words, she was prepared. She took out the scroll that third young master Qi gave her from her sleeve. It's okay, I have this. I will hide here after I pick the bead. Those wraiths may not be able to find me. Okay, I'm going. She held the knife in her left hand and was about to go up directly. Suddenly, she seemed to have thought of something and turned to look at Rongyue Shenlin. If those wraiths can't find me, will they vent their anger on you? Why don't you hide away first? Those wraiths are also responsible for every grievance. They probably won't hurt an innocent like you. In the night, Rongyue Shenlin's expression was not good. The scroll may not be able to stop the wraiths. What if they follow you in? I'm afraid you won't be able to use it in the world of the scroll. These wraiths may entangle you and turn you into a wraiths. You won't be able to get out and become one of the wraiths here. Is it worth it for a decorative bead? It's worth it. Ji Xinyue had already tidied herself up. She only threw 2 words at Rongyue Tianlan before flying straight towards the fan cliff. How much did she love her master that she would risk her life to help him pick a useless bead? Rongyue Tianlan saw her dashing towards the fan cliff like an ape and felt that she was a little unsettled. Anger swirled in his chest, and he clenched the fan in his hand. Although Ji Xinyu had already mentally prepared herself because of Rongyue Shenlin's words, when she hovered in the air above the cliff and used a treasured knife to pry out a blue pearl embedded in a piece of granite, the swarm of resentful spirits still gave her a fright. Countless blood-red wraiths shot out in all directions, as if they had exploded. There were thousands of them. They screamed and rushed toward her. If there were a dozen or even 40 or 50 of them, she could try to fight them. But a few thousand? How was this poking a hornet's nest? This was clearly poking a nest of wraiths. Not to mention fighting. Even if these wraiths surrounded her and spat at her, they could drown her. Ji Xinyu decisively turned and ran. She ran as fast as lightning, and those wraiths chased after her like maggots attached to bones. After all, she was only using lightness skill. There was no way she could outrun these wraiths. Chapter 2779. After all, she was only using lightness skill and could not use her spiritual force to create a protective enchantment. She could not use her spiritual force to travel 1,000 miles in an instant. No matter how fast she ran, she could only run at the speed of a human at her peak. However, these wraiths were obviously not restricted by these restrictions. Not only were they fast, but they also used various spells in the process. Countless stones, sharp knives, poisonous needles, lightning attacked Ji Xinyu intensely. If not for Ji Xinyue's nimble body and experienced swordsmanship, as well as the fact that her sword was a magic weapon that could slightly restrain those wraiths, she would have been entangled by those wraiths and turned into a skeleton. She quickly realized that running like this could not get rid of these wraiths. It seemed that she could only use that scroll. She forced back 2 wraiths that almost bit her arm with her sword. Just as she was about to pull out the scroll, she looked down and saw a large group of wraiths rushing in one direction from afar. Her heart skipped a beat. That was the direction where Rongyue Tianlan was standing. When she was running just now, she was afraid that she would implicate Rongyue Tianlan, so she deliberately ran in the opposite direction. She did not expect these wraiths to be linked together. She was the one who provoked them, but they actually attacked an innocent passerby. Rongyue Tianlan was still injured and could not use her lightness skill. If she was surrounded by those wraiths, Ji Xinyue's heart almost sank into the abyss. She turned her body abruptly and rushed in that direction with all her might. Ji Xinyue felt that she had never used lightness skill to run so fast in her life. She actually crashed into those wraiths just as they were about to surround Rongyue Tianlan. Rongyue Tianlan's long sword had just been drawn when he saw her shooting over like a cannonball, almost hitting the tip of his sword. He lowered his sword in time, but Ji Xinyue had already grabbed his arm and shouted, "Let's go." She pulled him up to the treetops. Those wraiths could not tolerate the fat meat in their mouths being snatched away just like that. They gathered together with the wraiths that were chasing Ji Xinyue and pounced on the 2 of them from all directions. Ji Xinyue glanced around and saw that as far as her eyes could see, it was densely packed with skulls shining with red light. Her scalp went numb. She pulled open the scroll. The scroll swayed in the wind. It was still a scroll. It did not suck the 2 of them in, as Ji Xinyue expected. What is going on? Could it be that entering the scroll required some kind of incantation? Third young Master Qi was such an idiot. He gave her this map of the universe, but didn't tell her how to enter the map of the universe. Rongyue Tian looked at the scroll shaking in her palm, then looked at her. What's wrong? Ji Xinyue scowled miserably. I don't know the incantation. The corner of Rongyue Tian's lips twitched slightly. She raised her hand and grabbed the map of the universe. Her palm pressed against the mountains and rivers in the map. The world was spinning. The world seemed to have become a spinning kaleidoscope. Ji Xinyu felt as if she had fallen into a madly spinning cylinder, and for a moment, she couldn't tell what was going on. Ji Xinyue was most afraid of this kind of situation where she couldn't reach the sky and couldn't reach the ground. She subconsciously curled up. Amidst the chaos, she felt as if she had rolled into an embrace. There was a faint plum fragrance in that embrace that made her feel peaceful for no reason. Don't be afraid. His voice was gentle, as if he was comforting her. We've entered the scroll of the universe. Ji Xinyu felt as if something had struck her heart. In this world, she had always been alone. No matter what kind of danger she encountered, she had to face it herself. Chapter 2780. Even if she had companions, those companions relied on her. When they were in danger, they needed her to save them. Therefore, no one had ever protected her in their arms and told her not to be afraid when she was in danger. This was the first time. A strange feeling suddenly welled up in her heart. It felt warm, wronged, and bitter at the same time. Of course, this feeling was fleeting. It was so fast that she almost couldn't feel it before it disappeared without a trace. After a while, Ji Xinyue felt her feet stop, and she finally stepped on solid ground. After she breathed a sigh of relief, she realized that she was still in Rongyue Tianlan's arms. His arms were tightly wrapped around her waist, holding her tightly. Her face was pressed against his chin, and their posture was unusually intimate. Her face heated up, and she raised her hand to push him away. She took a step back and suddenly staggered, leaning against a rock. What's wrong? Rongyue Tianlan realized that something was wrong with her and quickly looked her up and down. Finally, his gaze fell on her leg. He frowned and asked, "What's wrong with your leg?" Ji Xinyue leaned against the rock, her forehead covered in sweat. One of her legs was propped up on the ground, and the other was half lifted. It looked a little twisted. Her face was pale from the pain, but her expression was calm. "It's nothing. I hit a rock when I was running away just now. It's a small injury. I'll treat it now." As she spoke, she held her knife tightly and looked around to make sure that there were no resentful spirits following them. Rongyue Tianlan saw blood seeping out from her trousers and staining her light green skirt, like a flower blooming in the shade. Rongyue Tianlan suddenly took a step forward, grabbed her arm, and put her directly on a big rock. Ji Xinyue was shocked. She didn't expect him to have such strength now. She was stunned for a moment and wanted to get up. "What are you doing? Let me see your injury. Don't forget, I'm a doctor." Rongyue Tianlan held her injured calf. Ji Xinyue frowned slightly. In her heart, there was still a barrier between men and women. She didn't want him to see her leg again and again. Moreover, it wasn't her calf that was injured this time, but the area above her knee. She turned over and was about to sit up. "I said, it's a small injury. I can treat it myself." Before she could finish her sentence, Rongyue Tianlan tightened her grip on her calf. He only made a very light movement, but her body stiffened and her charming face paled. Her leg was broken. The pain of a broken bone was bone-piercing. Normal people would not be able to endure it. Even a 7-foot-tall man would howl and groan endlessly when his leg was broken like this. But she didn't make a sound, dragging her injured leg and running for so long. She even came to save him. He raised his head and looked at her sweaty face. His voice was cold. "Is a broken leg a minor injury? Then wouldn't it be considered a serious injury if the leg was sent flying?" Ji Xinyue paused for a moment, thinking that he was making a mountain out of a molehill. "If it's broken, I'll just reattach it. I'm pretty good at setting bones." Her tone was very casual. Obviously, this kind of injury was nothing to her. Rongyue Tian looked at her with a deep gaze. "Then, are you in pain?" Ji Xinyue was stunned. "Of course it hurts, but... So what if it hurts?" No matter how painful it was, she had to endure it. She still had to do what she had to do. Rongyue Tian heaved a sigh of relief. "I'll set your bones. If it hurts, just scream. Don't endure it." Ji Xinyue was speechless. Was it useful to scream? It would still hurt. If she screamed, other than being laughed at, there was nothing else. Chapter 2781. When she was young, no matter how painful it was when she fell, she would get up and rub it herself. No one would comfort her. When she grew up, no matter how serious her injuries were, as long as she could get up, she would grit her teeth and treat it herself. No matter how painful it was, she could only endure it. This nurtured her character of relying on herself for everything. She would also be in pain, but she was used to enduring it. She looked at him with wide eyes and pursed her lips slightly. She was still not used to being taken care of. Rongyu Tianlon raised her head and met her pair of big clear eyes. His heart seemed to have been hit hard by something. After thinking for a while, he took out a flat jade bone from his sleeve and handed it to her. Bite this. Ji Xinyuan naturally knew what this jade bone was for. It was to prevent her from biting her tongue if she was in too much pain. But she would not make such a low-level mistake. She just needed to endure it for a while, and it would be over. So she shook her head. No need. Just do it. I can take it. Rongyu Ishinlin was speechless. What kind of pain did this girl suffer in the past? He suddenly became angry. You are still a girl. In front of me. You don't need to be so strong. If it hurts, just shout it out. No one will laugh at you even if you cry. Ji Xinyue blinked. She actually did not understand why Rongyu Ishinlin was angry. But since he said so, she strangely felt like listening to him. She nodded. Okay. Rongyu Ishinlin's movements were extraordinarily swift. Ji Xinyue did not see his movements at all. He just held her calf and shook it like lightning. Crack. With a soft sound, the broken bone was connected. The pain of connecting a bone was no less than that of breaking a bone. If it was another girl, she would have been in so much pain that her face would have been full of tears. However, Ji Xinyue's body only stiffened slightly. Her face turned pale, but she did not move at all. Rongyu Ishinlin glanced at her.
She seemed to have realized something.
She opened her mouth and let out a soft, "aw." That sound was like a kitten's meow, very soft. If one did not listen carefully, one would not be able to hear it. Rongyu Ishinlin was speechless. He actually suspected that her pain nerves were not as sensitive as before. His gaze fell on her forehead. It was covered with pearl-like beads of sweat. Obviously, she was in pain. However, she had suffered alone for so long that she had long forgotten what it felt like to cry out in pain. Her heart seemed to have been pricked by something. Rongyu Tianlon looked at her and was speechless for a moment. Ji Xinyue let out a sigh of relief. She noticed that he was looking at her with a strange gaze, as if something was floating in the depths of his eyes. His gaze made her heart skip a beat, but she didn't know what to do. After thinking for a while, he finally remembered that he had asked her to cry out in pain, but she didn't. So he didn't feel any sense of accomplishment. The way he set the bones was actually much gentler than when she did it herself. Naturally, the pain was also less than before. Therefore, she felt that she needed to explain. Well, it's not that I don't want to scream, but it really doesn't hurt that much. It's much less painful than I thought. Your technique is very good, better than mine. While explaining, she didn't forget to praise him. After all, what she said was the truth. Rongyu Ishinlin didn't know whether to laugh or cry at her explanation. She couldn't help but raise her hand and rub her head. What a strong girl. After reconnecting the broken bone, it was time to treat the wound on her leg. However, Ji Xinyu didn't want him to handle it anymore, insisting that she could handle it herself. Chapter 2782. Rongyu Tianlon also felt that it was inappropriate to look at a lady's thigh. Last time, it was an emergency, but this time, there was no need to insist. No matter how severe the external injuries were, they could not be too severe. So he took out the medicine and handed it to her, letting her do it herself. He was still a gentleman, standing up and saying, "You do it yourself here, I'll go over there and take a look." He was pointing at a lush forest. This was inside the scroll of the universe. The mountains were warm, the water was soft, the weather was mild, and the sun was warm. It was a good place to recuperate. There were only the two of them here. The wraiths did not follow them in, so Rongyu Tianlon was relieved. After reminding her of a few things to take note of, he got up and walked into the forest. Since he had already gone far away, Ji Xinyu dared to take off her pants. She took off her pants to treat her injuries. In order to make it easier for her to fight, she wore slightly tighter pants. She could not roll them up, so she could only take them off or tear them. However, the fabric was unusually strong, so tearing it was a bit troublesome. She still had to save her strength for the rest of the journey, so she saved as much energy as she could. She simply took off her pants and pulled them down to her knees. She half sat there and checked her wound. The wound was a little big and deep. Although she had sealed her acupoints to stop the bleeding, it still looked a little scary. In the deepest part, she could faintly see the white bone in the flesh. No wonder it hurts so much. She did not expect to hit it so hard. No wonder it hurts so much. The wound needed to be cleaned and disinfected. She took out a gourd of wine. The wine had a strong disinfection effect, but it hurt a little when she poured it on the wound. She gritted her teeth and was about to pour it up when she suddenly looked up and saw a bright blue bucket not far away. There were words on the bucket. Use it to disinfect. The words were written in a flamboyant style. It was Rong Yu Tianlan's handwriting. It seemed that he was very considerate of her. Ji Xinyu was rarely taken care of like this, and her heart warmed slightly. She carried the bucket over. The bucket was half filled with some unknown medicinal liquid. When Ji Xinyu used it to clean her wound, not only did it not worsen the pain, but it also made her wound feel cool and the pain lessened a lot. As expected of an authentic doctor, he was completely different from a half-baked doctor like her, who had come from an unorthodox way. She had treated many wounds for herself in her life, so she was naturally skilled. However, she was only skilled and could not be considered professional. In addition, she didn't care much about her body, so when she treated the wound, she would stop the bleeding, apply medicine, tie the bandages, and wait for it to heal by itself. Fortunately, her body had a good foundation. No matter how serious her injuries were, they would heal after her treatment. Other than the deep and shallow scars, there were no other side effects. She looked at the big bloody wound on her leg. If there were no accidents, there would be a scar here too. She then looked at the other scars on her legs. For the first time, she felt that they were actually an eyesore. For someone with trypophobia like her, the feeling was a bit frightening. Even she had goosebumps when she saw it, let alone others. In fact, other than her pretty face, her body was really terrible. If she really got married, her groom would probably have nightmares and run away when he saw her injuries. If he managed to catch up with someone with a better temper, perhaps he would just marry a few concubines to comfort him. Chapter 2783. If she met someone with a bad temper, he might just throw her a letter of divorce and point at the door, telling her to scram as far away as she could. Of course, with her temper and methods, it was highly likely that her cheap husband would be the one to scram. But thinking about it still made her feel sad. Fortunately, she didn't plan to marry again, so she didn't have to hate her future husband. So ugly. Suddenly, a comment came from behind her. The voice was as cold as the cold wind from Siberia. Ji Xinyu was shocked. Her body instinctively bounced up, but just as she bounced halfway, she heard a chi sound and quickly fell back down, desperately tugging at her skirt. Her pants, which were originally pulled down to her knees, were completely torn in half by her sudden bouncing. At this moment, half of her pants were hanging on one leg. Not only could it not cover anything, it even tripped her. Opposite her, on a big rock, sat a person. A man in white. In Ji Shenyu's knowledge, men who wore white were generally good-looking and were basically the type that looked like a handsome tree in the wind. For example, Rongyue Tianlan, although he was extremely handsome in a blue robe, Ji Shenyu felt that if he wore a white robe, he would also be extremely handsome. But this man in white in front of her, Ji Shenyu felt a little strange. She even felt cold when she looked at him. If this man in white's facial features were to be separated, it could be said that every one of them was perfect and good-looking. Long and narrow phoenix eyes, a high-nose bridge, bright red lips, a beautifully curved chin. Even his ears were like those of a gold ingot. If these facial features were to be put together, it should have been a peerless, handsome man, but on this man's face, it was indescribably strange. It made one's heart turn cold at a glance. Moreover, he had a head of long snow-white hair. That long hair draped over his body like satin, as if he had added a silk robe outside his long robe. Other than his black eyes, this man's entire body was snow-white, like a snowman carved out of ice and snow for 10,000 years. Where he was, the temperature dropped by more than 10 degrees. It was supposed to be spring here, but after he came out, it seemed to have entered a cold winter. There were even snowflakes floating in the sky. Who are you? Ji Xinyu quietly took 2 steps back. She really wanted to take off her pants, but the person in front of her made her feel extremely dangerous, so she was on full alert and didn't dare to make any other movements. Could this person be a character from the Scroll of the Universe? Third young Master Chi shouldn't be so unreliable, right? He probably wouldn't give her a scroll that hid a great demon. Although this person was handsome, there was only one word written on his entire body: sinister. It was obvious that he was not a righteous person. Looking at his aura, he seemed to be some leader of the demonic path. In the Sanskrit continent, the righteous path was very prosperous. Various sects stood in great numbers, while the demonic path had always been suppressed. It was said that they were hiding in some barren place and didn't dare to come out easily. Of course, because the place where the devil path was located was very dangerous, the people of the righteous path would not easily take the risk. The immortal Tao and the demonic Tao could be said to be in a subtle harmony. Ji Xinyu had never seen a true demonic cultivator in her entire life. And now, she was very sure that she had met one. Haha, little girl, guess who I am? The voice of the man in white was very magnetic, but it sounded like the announcer in a news broadcast. There was no emotion, and it was very official. Chapter 2784. How would she know who he was? Ji Xinyu hated this guessing game the most. When she met this kind of person, her usual method was to cut him down. She would cut him down until he told her who he was. She narrowed her eyes slightly, clenched the broadsword in her hand, and began to consider which angle would be faster. Actually, what she wanted to dig out the most was this person's eyes, because when he said those 2 sentences, he looked at her legs a few times. His gaze was as direct as a knife, as if he could see her naked legs through her skirt. It made Ji Xinyu feel very uncomfortable. If she was wearing pants at this moment, she would have already flown over with her broadsword. But once she flew, her skirt would fly up, and she would definitely be exposed. Probably sensing Ji Xinyu's unfriendly gaze, the man in white laughed. Little girl, I advise you to be sensible and not do anything to me, or you will die miserably. And I don't want to kill you for now. He was clearly smiling, but his facial expression was very stiff, making people feel uncomfortable. Ji Xinyu had already seen that this person's martial arts should be unfathomable. While thinking quickly, she dealt with him. Who are you?
How did you get in?
The man laughed deeply. Little girl, you are the one who brought me in. He looked around and nodded with satisfaction. This place is much better than the broken soul cliff outside. I like it. Ji Xinyu suddenly understood. You are the guardian vengeful spirit of Lu Yuan Bead. No wonder this person was so gloomy. It turned out that he was a vengeful spirit. Vengeful spirits usually had a translucent physical appearance, or even a skull, but she didn't expect that the one in front of her had already cultivated a human form. She couldn't tell at first glance. Guardian vengeful spirit? The man lowered his eyes and whispered, then suddenly sneered. That bead is just a place for me to stay. I don't need to protect it. So, you're also a vengeful spirit who died in Misty Mountain? You died because of breaking off a marriage? This person must have been extremely powerful when he was alive, to be able to transform into Lu Yuan Bead King. Such a powerful person actually died because of breaking off a marriage. This Misty Mountain was indeed a dangerous place. Ji Xinyu's words seemed to have touched this person's heart. He raised his head and laughed, but his eyes revealed a stern look. That's right, to die for breaking off the engagement. If you didn't mention it, I would have almost forgotten about that matter, about being betrayed by that slut. Beautiful women are all bad things. When he said the last sentence, he was almost gnashing his teeth. Ji Xinyu, this devil had suffered at the hands of beautiful women before, right? Have you ever been betrayed by your wife? She even plotted against you here? Ji Xinyu seemed to be a little curious as she asked. In fact, She wasn't curious at all. She only asked this to stall for time. Usually, when this kind of old monster was trapped in a place for a long time, they would have a desire to talk. Now that she had given him this opportunity, he would probably talk about it again. And she needed this short opportunity. She stealthily stepped on her trousers and slowly moved to the side. She had placed a pair of pants beside the boulder just now. As long as she wore it, she would be able to slash people without any scruples. The premise was that she had to get rid of this troublesome pair of pants on her body first. But her plan was wrong. She didn't arouse the other party's desire to talk, but instead seemed to have stepped on a sore spot. Chapter 2785. That person's face darkened, and his hand suddenly grabbed forward. Ji Xinyu had already retreated a zhang away, and one of her torn trousers had been kicked off by her. She was about to kick the second one.
She was not prepared for this grab.
This person's arm was very strange. When he grabbed over, his arm actually stretched out a zhang. By the time Ji Xinyu realized it, the arm was already in front of her. She was also a fast person. Her feet suddenly stopped, and she was about to flip backwards. But halfway through, she suddenly remembered that she was still naked. Her expression changed, and she cursed under her breath, and could only lie back down. She was lying down in a sorry state, but fortunately, she managed to avoid this person's grab. After lying down, she immediately rolled 18 times on the ground, wanting to completely avoid that person's attack range. But that person's move was very strange. After grabbing empty air, his palms suddenly clenched, and a strong suction force pulled towards Ji Xinyu. Ji Xinyu could avoid the physical grab, but she could do nothing about this invisible suction force. Her body involuntarily rolled towards that person, and she could not even decide the position she should roll in. Under this kind of rolling, the problem of exposing herself naturally appeared. Her skirt was lifted up by the suction force from time to time, revealing her legs. That person's gaze fell on Ji Xinyu's legs, and his eyes burned with passion. His other hand made a gesture, and a gust of wind blew towards Ji Xinyu's skirt. That skirt seemed to be pulled up by a huge force, and was about to be completely exposed. This bastard was a peeping Tom. Ji Xinyu's expression changed greatly. She desperately tried to cover her skirt with both hands, but just as she touched her skirt, she heard a rip sound, and her skirt split from the middle. They were all exposed. Ji Xinyu panicked. In this kind of situation, it was useless for her to cover herself up, so she decided not to cover herself up. A light flashed in her palm, and taking advantage of the violent rolling, she raised her broadsword and stabbed towards the white-clothed person's heart. She wanted to kill this bastard. This was the first time in her life that she had met such a peeping Tom. This person clearly looked like a human, but she did not expect him to be so wretched. That person's eyes flashed slightly, and with a pinch of his fingers, the tip of Ji Xinyu's broadsword was actually caught between his fingers. This kind of thunderous attack was easily countered by him. What a feisty little girl. I like it. There seemed to be ice in that person's palm. After Ji Xinyu's broadsword was grabbed by him, there was actually a line of ice that quickly spread along the broadsword. In the blink of an eye, Ji Xinyu's broadsword had turned into an ice blade. What was even worse was that the ice line came too quickly. Ji Xinyu's hand was frozen before she could pull it back. The ice line extended from her hand to her arm, and wherever it went, her blood vessels froze. The man held her broadsword in his left hand and touched her, but with his right hand. Little girl, you have a pair of good legs. Your butt is not bad either. Pervert. Ji Xinyu's head exploded. She would rather die than suffer such humiliation. Her right hand was frozen, so she raised her left hand and smashed it towards her own temple. She was trying to commit suicide. The man's eyes flashed. The hand that was originally touching her buttocks grabbed her left wrist and looked at her. Do you want to die? Nonsense. If she didn't die, would she wait to be humiliated by him? Ji Xinyu pursed her lips and glared at him. Then, do you know that I am a vengeful spirit? If you die, you can accompany me as a vengeful spirit. Chapter 2786. That person's voice was cruel, as if he was determined to get her. Ji Xinyue's eyes narrowed slightly. She had forgotten about this. But in this misty mountain, she was restricted by the mountain rules and could not use her spiritual force. It was the same even in the scroll of the universe. However, once she died, her soul would not be restricted by this. She might be able to fight it out with this bastard and end up in a life and death struggle. Her right hand was stuck to the ice blade, and her left wrist was held by him. Other than her legs, she did not have any other attack weapons. She did not know what kind of evil martial arts this person practiced. Wherever he held, that place would be frozen. Ji Xinyue's arms were frozen, and she could only watch as the ice spread over her shoulders. That person looked at her, who was about to be frozen into an ice statue, and smiled. "Little girl, I will turn you into an ice statue. It will feel better to touch you that way." Her skills were not as good as his, and because of the rules, Ji Xinyue's heart was filled with grief and despair. In this place, there were only two people, Rongyue Tianlan and her. Rongyue Tianlan was still injured and could not use her lightness skill. How could she count on him to save her? Even if he came, he would just lose his life for nothing. She was about to use the stupidest way to die, which was to kill herself by biting her tongue. Suddenly, the sound of a flute could be heard from afar. With the sound of the flute, the surrounding air seemed to vibrate slightly. The vibration was very small, but it had the effect of changing the world. The place where Ji Xinyue was standing had turned into a world of ice and snow because of the appearance of the white-robed man. But with the sound of the flute, the surrounding snow melted at a speed visible to the naked eye, as if it had met the scorching sun. The ice that was spreading towards Ji Xinyue's arms suddenly stopped and began to slowly fade away. At the same time, with the continuous sound of the flute, there was a rustling sound all around, as if some branches and leaves were being moved by an inexplicable force. Then, there was the sound of wind as fine as rain. Ji Xinyue's heart skipped a beat. Her body was still in a half-frozen state, and she could not move for a while. But her neck could still move, and she looked towards the direction of the sound. She saw countless green leaves and flower petals shooting towards her from all directions before it even got close. The sharp sound of the wind seemed to tear through the air, bringing with it a sharp whistling sound. This momentum was not inferior to countless hidden weapons that were being shot at him. Using sound to control objects. Ji Xinyue had only heard of this kind of martial arts, but she never thought that she would be able to see the real version this time. The white-robed man probably didn't expect this, and his expression changed. He immediately withdrew his hands from Ji Xinyue's body and directly waved his hands in the air, sending waves of light towards those hidden weapons. It was obvious that the light wave he emitted was extremely powerful. As soon as it hit the hidden weapons, they turned into fine powder in the air. Ji Xinyue's heart sank. She was an expert in martial arts. When she saw the man in white make his move, she knew that these green leaves and petals would not be able to do anything to him. After the white-robed man sent out 7 or 8 beams of light to destroy the hidden weapons, he looked behind Ji Xinyue and laughed. Just this little bit. He choked on his words halfway and raised his palm to his chest. It was obvious that the flute player had used his ultimate move again. Ji Xinyue desperately turned her neck to look behind her, and then saw a strange scene. Behind her was the small forest, and from the small forest, a person floated out. She was really floating, and her long black hair was like satin splashed with ink. Chapter 2787. He was really floating. His long black hair was like satin, and his wide blue robe was like a blue haze in the wind. His slender fingers moved up and down on the green jade flute. Rongyue Tianlan. It was Rongyue Tianlan. His injuries seemed to have healed at this moment, and his body seemed to be surrounded by a halo. Even the blue robe on his body had a faint glow. As the notes flowed from his fingertips, the crushed green leaves spun rapidly in the air, forming green hedgehog-like balls that flew towards the man in white. Ji Xinyue's eyes widened. Rongyue Tianlan could use spells here. Was he not restricted by the rules of the Misty Mountain? There were thousands of green hedgehog balls, and each of them was the size of a basketball. They occupied almost all the space around the man in white. The sound of the green balls filled the air. The man in white did not dare to be careless. He subconsciously wanted to grab Ji Xinyue in front of him to block them. However, he did not manage to grab Ji Xinyue's clothes. Instead, he grabbed a green hedgehog ball.
Squeak.
The green hedgehog ball actually let out a low cry. The man in white also let out a muffled groan and retracted his hand. His palm seemed to be injured. Seeing that the green hedgehog balls were about to hit him, he could only wave his light waves to blast outwards. However, this time his move did not work. The green hedgehog balls were indeed shattered by his light waves, but they directly shattered into a large cloud of green mist that enveloped the man in white. As more and more of the green hedgehog balls shattered, the green mist surrounding the man in white became thicker and thicker. In the end, it was so thick that it could not be dispersed. Ji Xinyue stood there, protected by the green hedgehog balls. Through the gaps between the green hedgehog balls, she saw a large cloud of green mist enveloping the man in white and gradually retreating. From time to time, the man in white would emit a faint green light that penetrated the green mist. It was powerful, but it could not disperse the green mist around him. The man in white choked and coughed. Ji Xinyue's eyes widened. She did not expect that the notes from a small jade flute would be so powerful. She did not expect Rongyue Tianlan to have such profound skills. Supreme Immortal. Was this the skill that only Supreme Immortals could use? It was indeed miraculous. Under the effect of the flute, the ice on Ji Xinyue's body finally melted. However, her blood vessels had been frozen for too long, so even if they melted now, they were still numb. She could barely stand. Her body swayed, and the two halves of her dress also swayed. The cold wind blew on her legs, and it was bone-chilling. She helplessly stood in the middle of the battle arena. The wind in the arena tightened and tightened, causing her skirt to flutter again. Her beautiful face flushed red, and she forced her small hands to cover her skirt. Swoosh. A gust of wind sounded, and a robe covered her from head to toe. There was a faint plum fragrance on the robe. Ji Xinyue's heart skipped a beat as she forced her head out of the robe. It was a blue robe, and there seemed to be a faint light flowing on it. Needless to say, it was Rongyue Tianlan who took it off and threw it to her. Because of this action, the flute music paused for a moment, and the green fog surrounding the white-robed man became much thinner. Ji Xinyue did not have time to think, and hurriedly put on the robe, wrapping herself up tightly. His blue robe was unusually big on her, and the hem dragged on the ground, tripping her a little. Chapter 2788. His blue robe was unusually large on her. The hem dragged on the ground, so she lifted it up and tied it around her waist with a belt. It was barely enough for her to wear. The moment she regained her freedom, she quickly retreated from the battlefield. She was not a reckless person, and this was not a battle she could participate in. What she needed to do was not to be a burden to Rongyue Tianlan, and not to foolishly rush up to fight the man in white. The man in white had bullied her to this extent, and this grudge had grown. She had to get back at him, but not now. Rongyue Tianlan had been playing the flute the whole time, and did not exchange a single word with Ji Xinyue, but when she saw her quickly retreating, her eyes showed admiration. The man in white probably finally understood that the green fog around him could not be smacked with his hands, or else the more he smacked, the finer it became, and the finer it became, the more sticky it became. He suddenly retreated like a whirlwind until he was more than 10 feet away, and built a light green screen around him, no longer threatened by the green fog. The light green screen was transparent, and Ji Xinyue finally saw the man in white's appearance, and was stunned. The man in white should be called the man in green now. His whole body, from his hair to the soles of his feet, was green. His whole person looked like he had been fished out from a green dye vat, and even his handsome face was a miserable green. The green in his hair was even brighter, and from afar, It looked like he was wearing a green hat, and all of his elegance and handsomeness were gone. If not for the fact that this scene was not right, and that Ji Shinhua hated this person so much, she would have laughed out loud when she saw the man in white's appearance. The man in white hid in the light screen, and his eyes were like poisonous knives, staring fiercely at Romeo Tianlon. "You are actually a great immortal." His voice was cold and dignified, extremely imposing. But when he said the last two words, his nose itched and he sneezed, making the last two words turn in a circle, like a line in an opera, indescribably comical. Of course, the imposing manner disappeared without a trace. The man in white probably also felt that this voice sounded like a drama, and he rubbed his nose in annoyance. But just as he rubbed his nose, he seemed to have thought of something and put his hand down. Looking at his hand that looked like the Hulk, he cursed under his breath. Light flashed on his body, and the green powder on his body was finally repelled by the light wave. He had returned to being a handsome young master. The sound of the flute came to an end. Without the flute's control, the green fog gradually dispersed. The jade flute was hidden in Romeo Tianlon's sleeve, and the landscape fan was held in his palm. He had always been someone who liked to smile, but at this moment, his handsome face was cold and without a trace of a smile. His ink-black eyes glanced at the man in white. "Marquis Romshi?" The white-robed man's eyebrows moved slightly, and his eyes were filled with surprise. "How did you recognize me?" "That's not right. You shouldn't recognize me. I haven't left this place for over 10,000 years. Besides, I'm no longer." He paused here, as if he had realized something. Romeo Tianlon tapped his palm with the handle of the fan, and the corners of his lips curled up slightly. There was a hint of mockery in his eyes. "You're no longer in your original appearance, right? You have indeed changed a lot. Who would have thought that a dwarf would become?" He paused here, and then continued leisurely. A beautiful man piled up. Since the green fog had dissipated, the man in white naturally removed the light screen around him. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.